Chapter 343. Hunters were a group that valued strength, and there was no rule in Vanguard that forbade members from joining the B squadrons by force. After all, to most members of the hunter regiments, every squadron member was an outstanding talent. 99% of them were A rank, and they were excellent hunters who had been honed through combat and training. Therefore, the B squadrons couldn't wait to recruit these people, so why would they turn them down? The only thing that gave the captains a headache was that these people who came from the A fleet had always been more arrogant, always thinking that they were superior to the people from the other fleets. Therefore, it was indeed a difficult problem for the captains to get along well with the old team members, and this problem was not something that could be solved in a short period of time. Unlike the commanders who were thinking about the A squadron's decision, Scyllane's words were so shocking that their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Kick them out if they don't get the A squadron's approval. Was that something a B squadron member would say? All right. Ji Feng knocked on the table in front of him and waited for everyone to quiet down before continuing. This matter has been resolved, so there's no need for further explanation. If you have any questions, you can discuss them with the management after the meeting. Let's continue. The meeting was going to last for an entire day, and by the time it was over, the curtains should have fallen on the B squadrons as well. Since the commanders couldn't contact their squadrons right now, there was no point in worrying. It was obvious that the A squadron was doing this to see how the B squadrons would react after the removal of their commanders. While the B squadron commanders were feeling anxious and confused, the A squadron's cleanup crew had already begun taking action. The 11th squad wasn't the only one on the list, and the other 10 squadrons were more or less on the list. This was the result of a secret investigation conducted by the A squadron over the past few days. Even if the people on the list weren't completely wiped out, they would still be investigated further. During the cleanup, the seats of the B squadron commanders would display some basic information about the cleanup crew, including the reason why they were on the list, and so on. At first, the commanders of the B squadrons were very dissatisfied. They didn't even have the mood to sit here and continue the meeting. They were so angry that they almost left on the spot. But as the information came in, the expressions on the commanders' faces changed again and again. Scyllane was still the calmest out of all the C squadron commanders, which puzzled a lot of people. At the same time, not far from the 11th squad's base, a modified flying car with a large space landed on the ground. I'll just turn over a new leaf. Don't use that kind of bullshit as an excuse. Never mind, just go if you want to. Don't blame us for not persuading you later. The person who tried to persuade them turned around and walked back into his flying car. Another group of people followed after him. There were about 20 or so people who stayed behind. They were still hesitating. Hey, are you guys leaving or not? We're flying away first. What are you guys waiting for? Look at how many people the 11th squad has right now, and think about the state of the hunter world as a whole. How long can a squad like this last? Isn't this just asking for trouble? The person in the car didn't know if he was talking to himself or trying to convince the hesitant people, but the more he spoke, the more confident he became. Nothing was set in stone, and the higher-ups had already said that they had the right to make their own choices. If they didn't like this squad, then there was no reason for them to stay. It was better to find a stronger B squadron with a better future. Some of the people who were still hesitating felt that it made sense, so they boarded the flying cars one after another. When the rest of the people saw that everyone had left, they also boarded the flying cars without any ideas. Hey, Panda Eyes, are you coming or not? We're taking off if you don't. The person in the car shouted at the last person who was still standing there. The person in the car shouted once, but didn't get a response. He shouted a few more times before throwing a pebble at the person's head. The person who was standing there with his head down took a few seconds to raise his head. He was a 15 or 16-year-old boy. The most eye-catching thing about him was the thick dark circles around his eyes, which were literally panda eyes. After the young man raised his head, he scratched the back of his head and looked at the people on the mountain in a daze. He slowly replied. Huh. My ass. We're going back to headquarters. Are you coming back or not? If not, we're leaving right now. Didn't you say you were going to the 11th squad? The boy looked around and noticed that Mogaz and the others were already far away. He jumped to his feet and chased after them while shouting, "Wait for me, I don't know the way." Fuck. The person next to the car cursed and closed the door. The flying car that had just arrived took off once more and went back the way it came. On the other hand, Mogaz never stopped talking as he made his way to the 11th team's base. "Why did you decide to come to the 11th squad, Phoebe?" Mogaz asked. "I rolled the dice yesterday, and the number was exactly 11. Phoebe puffed out her ample chest and tucked her long curls behind her ears. "I trust my instincts." Mogaz was used to Phoebe's antics by now. He didn't even try to hide his gaze from her perky breasts and stared at the base up ahead. "Your instincts are always decided by 2 dice. What about you, Kong Lujia?" Mogaz turned to the person on the other side. The young girl named Kong Lujia had a pretty face, but when you looked closely, you would notice that she wasn't as delicate as she looked. Her eyes reminded you of an owl, a predator in the dark. "We'll go wherever we're assigned. It doesn't matter which squad we're assigned to." Kong Lujia found Mogaz's question to be rather pointless. The A squad's decision was made so quickly that they didn't even have the time to investigate it. Moreover, the A squad didn't know much about the B squadrons, so they didn't know much about the 11th squad. All they knew was that the 11th squad was a new squad with extremely few members and relatively young members. They hadn't heard of any great achievements until now. They didn't even see the shadow of the 11th squad's name on the platoon's merit ranking. Mogaz was talking to Phoebe and Kong Lujia about a certain senior in the A squad when he suddenly noticed that Mao had stopped in his tracks. He followed his gaze and saw a man sitting at the entrance of the 11th squad's base. He wasn't here when they were checking out the entrance earlier. When did he show up? Just now. His breathing was soundless, and he looked like a statue that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. There was no sign of life in him at all, but no one could ignore him. Who the hell is he? The 11th squad actually has someone like him? All 5 of them were extremely puzzled. Cheto opened the book in his hand and ignored them. He simply stared at the book quietly like a statue. The 5 of them didn't say anything either. Crack crack, the strange silence was broken by the opening of the base's entrance. A middle-aged man reeking of alcohol poked half of his body out of the half-opened door and glanced at the 5 of them. Then, he looked behind them and gulped down a mouthful of alcohol before letting out a soft sigh. "It's just the 5 of you, huh?" Shusag gulped down 2 more mouthfuls before turning to look at Cheto. As expected, the 11th squad isn't welcome here. Mogaz and the others found it very strange. It was because the middle-aged man reeking of alcohol was smiling brightly when he said something that should have been regretful and sad. Chapter 344. A light breeze blew past them, carrying with it the faint sweet smell of fruits and the stench of alcohol on Shusag's body. It was a completely different atmosphere from the hunter base they were familiar with. It was too strange. Shusag swirled the remaining alcohol in the bottle, tipped his head back, and gulped it down. After he was done, he wiped his mouth and tossed the bottle into the corner of the defensive wall. "You're the ones the higher-ups told us to split the loot." "That's right. The 5 of us are the ones who were assigned to us. The others have already returned and are probably applying for a transfer, so." Mogaz shrugged. "So it's just the 5 of us." "Oh, I see. It looks like those people aren't fated to be with us. What a shame." Shusag's tone and expression didn't contain the slightest hint of regret. "But before the meeting, our captain instructed us not to let anyone who was assigned here enter the 11th squad's base. Our mission now is to prevent any of you from entering the base." "Not a single one." Mogaz and the others frowned. Normally speaking, the A squad would be more than happy to accept the A squad's members, not to mention that the 11th squad was still in its infancy. Shouldn't they welcome the 5 of them with open arms and open their gates to welcome them? This was different from what they had imagined. Rejection? No, definitely not. The 11th squad wouldn't be acting this way if they were really rejecting them. So, this was probably a test. While the 5 of them were mulling over Shusag's words, Cheto closed his book, put it away, and jumped to the ground. He and Shusag guarded the base's entrance from both sides. Cheto and Shusag's actions confirmed their suspicions even more. This had to be a small test. Realization dawned on Mogaz's face. He tossed his backpack to the side, stretched his arms and legs, and did a set of warm-up punches while he was at it. The other 4 also put down their backpacks, but not as exaggerated as Mogaz's. Pango, in particular, took a few steps back after throwing down his backpack. It looked like he was planning to leave the battlefield. Alright, let's begin. Mogaz spread his arms and struck a very arrogant pose before looking at Shusag and Cheto. Shusag didn't move from his spot. He merely lifted his chin, indicating that the 5 of them could do as they pleased. Coincidentally, the direction of the wind changed. Before, it had been blowing from Shusag's direction to the 5 of them, but now it was the other way around. The sand on the ground formed a small whirlpool that moved a few steps before dissipating. With a serious expression on his face, Mogaz lifted the tip of his foot and drew an arc in the air. Then, he abruptly spun around and struck out with his palm. Ha! 5 translucent marbles bounced toward Shusag and Cheto. After making a weak parabola, they fell to the ground and rolled a little more at their remaining speed until they stopped a meter away from the duo. Shusag, Carrie and the others, who were watching the situation outside the surveillance room, could not help but twitch their eyes. Kong Lujia and the others didn't move at all while Mogaz was tossing the balls, but Mao and Kong Lujia finally moved after the balls came to a complete stop. They walked toward Cheto and Shusag slowly at first, but their speed started picking up as they got closer and closer to Shusag. While Mao and Kong Lujia were charging toward them, Cheto and Shusag were about to attack. Bang 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 bang, 5 explosions later, the 5 marbles exploded. There wasn't any physical damage caused by the explosion, so they simply vanished into thin air. Neurotoxin? Cheto asked softly. It wasn't a particularly violent neurotoxin, and Mogaz often used it to play pranks. It could paralyze a person's nerves, and the drug only had a half-life of half an hour. If their opponent fell for it, they would have enough time to deal with it. Moreover, thanks to the direction of the wind, the 5 of them weren't affected by the toxin. After the pinball exploded, Mao and Kong Lujia charged toward Cheto and Shusag and attacked them head-on with their bare fists and kicks. Mao vs Cheto, and Kong Lujia vs Shusag. Mao's attacks were both hard and soft. Sometimes they were fast, sometimes they were slow, sometimes they were fast, sometimes they were fast, and sometimes they were slow and agile. Although the rhythm of his attacks was different, he was able to overwhelm his opponent with every hit. If it was an ordinary person, every time they received a blow, the blood vessels in their arms would vibrate and expand. Under different rhythms of attacks, the irregular vibrations of the blood vessels would cause abnormal blood flow. Soon, the person would discover that their entire arm would become sluggish, accompanied by pain, and they would lose control of it. A person like Mao would always lead his opponent's rhythm in battle. Before Kong Lujia threw a punch, a boxing glove appeared on her hand and covered most of her palm. Only the tip of her finger was exposed, and there was a bulge at every joint. To Shusag's knowledge, a normal person would probably break a couple of bones if they took a hit from a bulge head-on. The soles of Kong Lujia's shoes had also changed a little. It allowed her to adjust her position with the help of the ground's resistance. Unlike Kong Lujia's delicate appearance, her punches were unusually fierce and powerful. Shusag felt that the woman in front of him wasn't a girl who hadn't matured yet, but a man with a strong body. Every move she made was imbued with killing intent. It was as if she was trying to condense it into a sharp blade and slash at her prey. Even Carrie and the others who were watching the battle through the monitor in front of the base's entrance could sense a little of it. The killing intent only reached its peak when Kong Lujia's punches and kicks were about to come into contact with Shu Sag. At other times, Kong Lujia hid her killing intent very well. As expected, the A squad is full of excellent hunters, commented Diaz. Phoebe and Mogaz followed suit after Mao and Kong Lujia had attacked. Phoebe swung a 9-segmented whip at Cheto like a venomous snake. Under her control, the whip crackled and crackled with electricity from time to time. On the other side, Mogaz was constantly changing positions and angles, throwing different hidden weapons at Shu Sag to create more openings for Kong Lujia to launch more effective attacks. Kong Lujia's attacks would always be blocked by Shu Sag's finesse, but Shu Sag wasn't going to let her off easily. One close range, one long range. The quartet didn't say anything. It was as if they had come to some kind of agreement in an instant, and they worked together in the most optimal way possible. On the other hand, Pango paced a few steps before coming to a sudden stop. He scratched his ears and cheeks in a daze for a moment before his head drooped. It looked like he was dozing off again. However, Mao grew more and more suspicious as time went on. Logically speaking, a man who had taken so many of his attacks head-on should have shown some effect even if he wasn't poisoned, shouldn't he? Even if Cheto's arms felt like steel, there shouldn't be no effect at all, right? During many hunts in the past, Cheto was often the one to drive the rhythm of the battle. What he didn't know was that Cheto had come into contact with this kind of fighting style a long time ago. It was because Cheto had once used this kind of fighting style that was both hard and soft. At first, Mao was the one who set the pace, but Cheto was almost in sync with him. When Mao was slow, Cheto was slow, and when Mao was fast, Cheto was fast. To Mao's dismay, the rhythm of the battle was starting to slip out of his control. The reason Shikai had always been fond of the Origin robots was because they possessed a learning ability that no other robot could imitate or possess. In fact, they could even learn new things from one instance and learn new things from another. Cheto, for example, had already learned to control the rhythm of the battle. Mao's special attacks were even less effective against Cheto because he wasn't human in the first place. He wasn't afraid of the high-voltage electricity on Phoebe's whip either. In fact, he could even turn himself into a complete insulator. It was his very nature to do so. Phoebe and Mao didn't know about this at all. If they did, they would have never used such a method against Cheto. Mogaz was just as dispirited as Shu Sag was. It was only now that Shu Sag realized that it wasn't just the 4 of them working together. It was a plan the 5 of them had come up with in a short amount of time. We can't let any of you in. Not a single one of you. The 5 of them remembered Shu Sag's words. This was Shu Sag and Cheto's mission. According to the rules of the hunters, they would fail the mission if they missed out on even one of them and allowed one of them to enter the dark abyss. Therefore, from the very beginning, the 5 of them had this plan. If they couldn't win, they would use this method. If the 4 of them couldn't enter, they would send Pango in. Therefore, rather than saying that Pango was dozing off while they were fighting, it was more accurate to say that Pango was preparing for this crucial attack. He was adjusting his body to the most suitable state to withstand the kick from these 2 people who didn't know what gentleness was. Bang! A loud, muffled sound that sounded like a giant boulder hitting the ground froze the 4 of them. Pango had crashed into an unknown gray object. At least to the 5 of them, it was an unknown object. Pango was forcefully stopped in his tracks. Shu Sag's lips curled into a smile. That sound is soothing. I really feel bad for that little guy for running into that fatty. The gray wall blocking Pango's path slowly opened up, revealing a fat cat who was happily munching on a bag of snacks. Before Pango could react, Huimao flapped his wings and sent the falling Pango flying. Pango, who was still dizzy from the impact in the air, completely fainted. In the surveillance room. Poor kid, I wonder if he's unconscious yet. Xiao Shang asked from behind the screen. Of course. How could Lord Cat not faint? Carrie answered. Carrie felt deep sympathy for the poor kid who was knocked out by Huimao's wing. At the same time, he also felt sympathy for the other 4 kids who were about to suffer the same fate. Just as the 4 faces froze, a fat, white head popped out of the wall. Shueqiu's head popped out and flipped over the 10-meter-tall wall with practiced movements that didn't match his size. After landing with a thud, he scratched his butt and chuckled at the unconscious person who had fallen to the ground. Then, he rolled into a ball and rolled over to the other side of the wall. After rolling to Pango's side, Shueqiu pulled Pango up with his fleshy paws and yelled at the base, "He's really unconscious. But he's not bleeding." After yelling, Shueqiu grabbed Pango's leg and dragged him toward the base. Standing outside the door, Kong Lujia and the other 3 were silent as they watched the fat white bear drag Pango inside. They finally understood what Shusag really meant when he said, "We can't let the 5 of you walk in." He meant walk instead of 5. They couldn't walk in. They had to knock him out and drag him inside. After Shueqiu dragged Pango inside, Shusag pushed aside the fiery net and walked out. "What do you think? Do you still want to join the 11th squad? There's nothing to be embarrassed about. If you want to leave, then leave. You have the right to decide if you want to accept it, and we have the right to decide if we want to accept it and how we want to accept it." The 4 of them didn't respond. Instead, they continued to attack Shusag. They were starting to understand why the 11th squad had been established so smoothly. The 11th squad was far stronger than they thought they were, and they hid their strength very well. Just how many secrets did they hide? Time passed slowly, and the meeting in the conference hall came to an end. After eating dinner provided by the A squad, Sillin and Shotten walked out of the conference hall and headed toward the spaceplane. Back in the conference hall, the higher-ups meeting was still going on. Sillin had wanted to chat with Songba Leruo, but it seemed that he would have to wait for another time. "Keep it up, Sillin. I believe you can do better than us. I might not be able to go this far, but you can lead us to greater heights," Shotten said with a smile. While Shotten and Sillin were chatting merrily toward the spaceplane, a man who had also come out of the conference hall jogged past Sillin and Shotten. He was talking to someone through his communicator. Shotten and Sillin boarded their spaceplanes at the landing point and took off. After Sillin's spaceplane left, inside a spaceplane that had just taken off, the person who had passed Sillin through the communicator just now looked at the screen. The screen showed the scene of him running up from behind Sillin. "Not a single attempt at decoding?" Someone behind him asked. "Nope." The 2 men slowed down the video and zoomed in to observe the movements of Sillin's fingers. To their disappointment, Sillin did not attempt to decode the code as they had expected. That shouldn't be the case. That's not the information we received. If he really was the Celine from before, he wouldn't be indifferent to this signal code. Could it be that I ran too fast and didn't give him enough time to react? The man was puzzled. "No, it's definitely not like that. People who understand this kind of code have an inertial reaction in their minds, which allows them to grasp the information contained in the code in the shortest time possible. They can move their fingers and use the microamplitude of their fingers to decode it. But this Sillin didn't do anything to decode the code. His facial expression doesn't even seem to have changed. If only we could see his eyes clearly. That way, it would be easier to find the flaws in his eyes." On the screen, there were only images of Sillin's side and back. This side was blocked by Shotten, so they couldn't see Sillin's eyes at all. Therefore, it was impossible to tell if this Sillin was the person they were looking for through his eyes. Chapter 345. By the time Sillin returned to the base, all 5 members of the 11th squad were already lying on the sick beds in the base's infirmary. In Shusag's words, the mission was a success. Sillin didn't expect too many people to join the 11th squad this time. He didn't want the 11th squad to absorb too many people at once either. That wouldn't be good for the 11th squad's development. It was a good thing that 5 new members joined the 11th squad this time. The 11th squad's members were young and full of potential. All 5 of them were dragged into the infirmary in a comatose state. Mao, Mogaz, and Pango, as well as Kong Lujia and Phoebe, all of them were treated the same way. They were all wounded and in a sorry state. Silen's main goal was to crush the pride of the A squad members and get a feel for what they were capable of. Moreover, those who didn't sincerely want to join the 11th squad would definitely ask to leave. The 11th squad wouldn't force those who didn't want to stay. However, none of them showed any intention of leaving after waking up. When Silen arrived at the infirmary, Mogaz wasn't dejected at all. Instead, he looked as excited as if he'd been injected with chicken blood. I knew it, I knew it. Concentration is the essence of concentration. The 11th squad may be small in number, but every single one of them was an elite. Don't you think so? Mogaz grunted excitedly at the other 4 people on the sickbeds before Phoebe whipped him off the bed. So noisy. Phoebe rolled over and closed her eyes to rest. Mogaz hadn't stopped talking ever since he woke up. Carrie couldn't help but leave after chatting with him for a while. Mogaz was just too talkative. Even Carrie, who was a chatterbox, couldn't take it anymore. Mogaz was just too talkative. All 5 members of the 11th squad turned to look at Silen at the same time. Even without opening her eyes, Phoebe could tell that this person was someone they had never seen before. Several members of the 11th squad had appeared after they woke up, but this young man was unfamiliar to them. They didn't know much about the 11th squad, and they had only heard rumors about Silen. Not even the gossipy Mogaz had seen Silen in person. Mogaz, who was crawling back to his bed after being slapped to the ground, also stopped talking. For a moment, the only sound that could be heard in the infirmary was the faint beeping of the medical equipment. Silen didn't need to look at the equipment to know that the 5 of them didn't have any serious injuries. With their abilities, they could recover after a day of sleep. Glancing at the 5 of them, Silen said, "You're in good spirits." Mogaz wasn't in a hurry to get into bed. He sat on the bed and swung his legs as he looked at Silen. "Are you from the 11th squad too, brother?" "That's right, I am." On a table in the infirmary was a box of natural fruit candies Tang Chocho had made from Sigma's fruits. Silen popped one into his mouth and pulled out a chair to take a seat. Mogaz introduced himself and the other 4 members of the squad. "We're new members of the 11th squad. From now on, we'll help each other, understand each other, and love each other." Before he could finish, Phoebe whipped him again. "Go and love yourselves." Mogaz rolled on the ground for a while before he crawled back to his feet. He rubbed the spot where he was whipped, jumped back to his bed, and asked Silen, "You haven't introduced yourself yet, brother." "My name is Silen." "The 5 of them." The infirmary fell silent once more. The 5 of them looked at Silen from top to bottom like they were looking at a rare animal, then from bottom to top again. After they woke up, they chatted with Carrie and the others for a while. Shusag told them that he was no match for their captain, Silen. From what they learned, the captain of the 11th squad, Silen, was probably a very powerful person. The fact that he was able to command the 11th squad meant that he was no ordinary person either. However, the man in front of them looked a little too young, and he didn't seem to have a domineering aura at all. In fact, he looked like an errand boy among the A squad's members. "You're Silen, the captain of the 11th squad?" Mogaz asked tentatively. Silen nodded. "Yes, that's me." Mogaz scratched his head and chuckled. "Sorry, I didn't recognize you just now. But Captain, you're really a good hunter, and you're a good one. Also, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you, new member." "Go ahead." "Who is that Cheto guy? Why isn't Uncle Shusag afraid of fire? Is that really a cat that slapped Pango unconscious? Are all animals in the 11th squad not to be messed with?" The 11th squad. A series of questions flew out of Mogaz's mouth, and they weren't just a few questions. After Mogaz was done, Silen smiled faintly and said, "You'll have to figure them out yourselves. Also, if you stay in the 11th squad and become an official member, you'll receive the benefits of being an official member." After that, Silen rose to his feet and walked out of the infirmary, leaving the 5 people staring at each other in shock. "How is it?" Yudi asked from outside the infirmary. "It's fine. There shouldn't be any problems." "What did Diaz say?" "Diaz is very satisfied with the results." "That's good to hear. Diaz's instincts are always accurate. Also, all 5 of them are rare talents," Silen said. Indeed, Yudi agreed with the assessment. Although all 5 of them were knocked unconscious and dragged into the base's entrance, they hadn't used their trump cards against Cheto and Shusag at all. The most important thing for a hunter was their trump card, and a good hunter wouldn't expose it to strangers easily. They were smart. There was no way this was all Pango was capable of. How could Moga's hidden weapons be so weak? There were 3 other people as well. Silen could tell a lot from their breathing patterns, and Silen was certain of his suspicions because he had watched videos of them fighting each other before he came here. "I'm going back to rest after a whole day of meetings. Don't disturb me if there's nothing important." "Okay." After a brief chat with Yudi, Silen went back to his own lounge. As for the 5 people, Silen wasn't worried about them at all. There were people watching over them, and there were plenty of people explaining the 11th Squad's rules and history. Silen didn't need to worry too much about anything else. After returning to his lounge, Silen closed the door and took out his microcomputer. Then, he typed in a series of characters on the light screen. These characters were decoded from the decrypted codes sent from the communicator of the person who had run past him. When Celine came into contact with these codes, he did not need to decode them immediately. His memory aside, even if he were to decode them immediately, he would be able to decode them without using his fingers. His decoding ability was like a small computer, and this was something that the person did not expect. After Silen had inputted the second decoded character, he began to decode the chain of password messages. The reason he was paying so much attention to the encrypted message wasn't because he was curious about the person behind it. It was because the characters were something only a robot could understand. However, not every robot could correctly decode this encrypted message because the password was arranged according to each person's habit. Different people would see different information, so unless they knew the password of the person who encrypted it, it would only be a bunch of messy codes. Moreover, the characters were arranged according to Mo Heng's habits. Silen knew Mo Heng's habits all too well. He was certain that Mo Heng was the one who sent the message. As for the person who purposely leaked the message, Silen didn't think that it was an act of kindness. In any case, he would know what was going on after he decoded the encrypted message. Silen's fingers flew across the light screen. The combination of these characters had a specific meaning, just like the parts they were made of. All Silen needed to do was to assemble these parts according to the correct method. This form of code was similar to the Shi family's chain-filled stars chessboard. Other than the correct assembly of the character parts, there was also a simulated test that required 98% and above comprehensive precision. In other words, the minimum comprehensive precision of the simulated assembly was 98%. If this requirement couldn't be met, then the decoding would fail. It was worth pondering that the final product that Mo Heng used to assemble this character part should be the first machine that Silen had assembled when he skipped classes at Seven Lights and was dragged to Seven Lights Engineering Research Institute by Mo Heng. As someone who had achieved a stable 99% accuracy, this decoding was relatively easy for Silen. 2 minutes later, the code was unraveled. However, the encrypted message revealed a second decoding image. Multiple decoding. Multiple encryption. It looked like this message was highly confidential. Otherwise, Sir Mo wouldn't have spent so much effort to set up the message like this. The second decoding image was a weapon diagram. Many parts of the diagram were labeled with characters. There was a symbol at the center of the diagram, Project Nightmare. Silen didn't care if Mo Heng was participating in Project Nightmare. After all, Project Nightmare was a military project, and Mo Heng's son held an important position in the military. The relationship between the two must be close. What puzzled Sillin once more was that although the weapon was destructive, the characters were all Mo Heng's criticisms of the weapon's flaws. But with Sillin's understanding of Mo Heng, there was no need for the old man to encrypt his criticism of the weapon and send it out. What was the old man trying to do? Sillin stared at the characters flipping on the light screen and pondered over Mo Heng's intentions. Memories flashed through Sillin's mind before he suddenly stopped at a certain scene. Is this it? Sillin extended a finger and began adjusting the positions of the characters. Chapter 346. Mo Heng had been famous for so many years and taught a lot of students, but none of them had inherited his legacy. In Mo Heng's own words, it was called no successor. Old Mo was not inflexible. In fact, he was quite familiar with some of the hidden rules of the circle. When he first entered the academic world, he played around with ease, but it was just for fun. What Mo Heng valued the most was still academics. Therefore, over the years, many people with powerful backgrounds had stuffed people into Mo Heng's hands. At first, Mo Heng found it hard to refuse them out of respect for the other party, but later on, he just ignored them. Don't you have power, advantage, and money? There are so many famous mentors and academicians in the entire League of Stars academic world and Seven Lights. Send whoever you want, I don't care. I don't do things like teaching children for others. When Sillin met Mo Heng at Seven Lights, it happened to be the most annoying period of school for Mo Heng. Every time it happened, Mo Heng would change his communicator and number, ignore everyone, and wander around on his own. Those who wanted to find connections couldn't even stop Mo Heng's people, and once the registration deadline arrived, they gave up on stuffing people into Mo Heng's hands. In reality, Mo Heng was not as sage-like, refined, and virtuous as the outside world saw him to be. He was an academic ruffian at the core, and the old man's mind was actually full of wicked ideas. He was not a soft-hearted person either, or he wouldn't have been able to raise a general like Mo Qing otherwise. Those who knew Mo Heng in his younger days more or less knew a little about him. Later on, with decades of experience as a mentor and the title of Seven Lights Vice Headmaster, Mo Heng had become a lot more restrained in the outside world. However, his wicked ideas did not diminish, and he even became childish from time to time. Mo Heng had personally taught less than 50 students, and the rest were all engineering partners. Therefore, there were only around 50 students who could be said to know a little about Mo Heng. However, these people could only call Mo Heng a mentor at best, and could not compare to Sillin's weight in Mo Heng's heart. There were a lot of talented students in the League of Stars, and there were a lot of specially recruited students in Seven Lights every year. Although many of the students he taught were forced in by the big shots of the League of Stars through their connections, they were very talented in this area. Otherwise, Mo Heng would not have taught them even if he had to offend them. The problem was, Sillin was the only student that Mo Heng had taken a liking to for the past few decades. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Sillin's temperament and nature were very much to Mo Heng's liking. Moreover, Sillin was extremely talented, so Mo Heng had always had high hopes for her. Unfortunately, the series of events that happened later on hurt Mo Heng's old heart. If there was a reason why Mo Heng thought highly of Sillin, it wasn't just because of Sillin's talent. Sillin could always think along the same lines as Mo Heng when it came to machinery. Moreover, Mo Heng had revealed his true nature in front of Sillin a lot of times, unlike when he was teaching other students who would put on an act and display the dignity of a great mentor. Therefore, Sillin had to be the one who understood Mo Heng the most out of all the students he had taught. At first, Sillin was uncertain about this code message, but after deciphering it step by step until now, Sillin was certain that Mo Heng's code message was meant for him to see. Mo Heng's students might not know all of Mo Heng's character coding habits, but they would at least know a bit about it. However, the simulated mechanical assembly of characters had increased Sillin's suspicion. Perhaps there were plenty of students who had assembled similar machines before, but Sillin was definitely the only one who knew about this decoding diagram. Before Sillin left the League of Stars, he had contacted Mo Heng through a secret code. At the time, Mo Hung had not personally taught his students, so Silan was the only one who knew the correct way to decode this diagram. Silan dragged away the comment on the light screen, changed his position, and analyzed it step by step. This diagram was a matrix decoding diagram. It was not a simple 3D matrix, but a unique form of the Mo family. Before Silan left Seven Lights, Mo Hung had been researching this matrix, and he was almost at the point of success. Silan had some understanding of this matrix. Mo Hung had even bragged in front of Silan that he had created a mechanical implantation program of his own that could optimize certain programs in a machine and protect against intrusion. He had even asked Silan to keep it a secret that after he had perfected this matrix experiment, Mo Hung would write a paper and submit it to one of the two giant electronic journals of the League of Stars, Code. Mo Hung called this matrix the Mo matrix, so when you slowly deciphered these matrices, there would be an ancient M character on the last matrix, and that was what Mo Hung had purposely marked on it. Silan had read the last issue of Code before the League of Stars' uprising, and there was no related article by Mo Hung in it. Either Mo Hung had not finished perfecting it, or he had been delayed by some other matter. While thinking, Silan swiftly moved his fingers to decode the diagram. As Silan continued to decode it, the diagram gradually began to change. When Silan had completely decoded the diagram, the original weapon diagram had turned into a star chart. When Silan compared the star chart with the star chart, he discovered that the star chart was marked on a planet at the center of Sector C. After the star chart was opened, a paragraph of text appeared on the light screen. This paragraph of text would only appear for 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, the text would disappear, and it would disappear irrevocably. From this paragraph of text, Silan learned of Mo Hung's current situation. However, Old Mo's life was not in danger for the time being. After all, Old Mo's son, General Mo Ching, held a part of the military force in his hands, and Mo Hung's influence in the academic world could not be ignored. Unless it was absolutely necessary, those people would never threaten Mo Hung's life. In fact, they would even treat him with good food and drink. It was just like Mo Hung said in the text, "It's like rearing a pig." Mo Hung did not ask Silan to rescue him. After all, Sector C was a military sector, and right now it was even more difficult for a hunter to sneak in. Mo Hung only hoped that Silan could pass on Mo Hung's current location and current situation to some people, and in turn put pressure on the people who imprisoned him. This method was effective because Mo Hung's years of influence allowed him to unite a portion of the non-military personnel. Moreover, they came from all over the League of Stars, and this expanded their sphere of influence. In a chaotic environment like this, an incident like this could become a fuse and cause new chaos. There were a lot of people behind the scenes who were waiting for a chance to interfere. However, this method was not foolproof. Mo Hung was only doing this to take revenge on those who imprisoned him, but there was no absolute guarantee that Mo Hung's life would be in danger. Moreover, it would take too long for Silan to make any guarantees. Silan wondered if he should make a trip to Sector C. Unfortunately, the situation in Sector C had changed, and he would become a public enemy if he was not careful. He had to borrow external help. But who should he borrow from? CI Jincheng's side was definitely out of the question. The CI family's every move would attract suspicion, and Knight's side was also out of the question. His family was playing an important role there, and they were being watched closely. After thinking for a moment, Silan wrote a secret code and sent it out. With that guy's current abilities, he should be able to help, right, somewhere in Sector C. It was the planet marked on the star map that Silan had deciphered. There were squadrons of patrol fleets and satellite defense arrays around the planet's periphery. There were also many buildings in the form of bases on the planet, and military management was everywhere. In fact, this was the case in most of Sector C. At a research base on the planet, many transport spaceships flew out of it. The spaceships were filled with all kinds of instruments and machinery. The manufacturing workshop of this research base was huge, and there were a lot of personnel. However, most of them were mechanized production lines. Inside a very large workshop on the 7th floor of the research department, Mo-hung was lying on a recliner in his work clothes. His legs were propped up on the table, and his eyes were closed. No one knew what he was thinking. On the table where his feet rested was a machine that had just been assembled. There was also a pile of parts waiting to be assembled next to it. If it was the Mo-hung of the past, he would never allow these things to be on his table. It was irritating to look at them, and his OCD would force him to either move these parts somewhere else or assemble them directly. But now, his OCD didn't work either. Mo-hung left the parts scattered on the table without sorting them out. Right now, Mo-hung was exuding an aura that said he couldn't be bothered with them. Compared to the old man in Silen's memories, the current Mo-hung was thinner. The main reason for this was due to his emotions. It was obvious that Mo-hung wasn't in a good mood. He hadn't been in a good mood ever since he was brought to this crappy place. Ding! The workshop door opened, and a middle-aged man who looked like a gentleman walked in. The middle-aged man was wearing engineering work clothes similar to Mo-hung's. The middle-aged man put his hands in his pockets and walked next to Mo-hung. However, Mo-hung didn't open his eyes to greet him at all. When the man walked in, Mo-hung frowned and looked even more impatient. "Instructor Mo," the middle-aged man said softly. Mo-hung didn't answer and tilted his head in the opposite direction. "Instructor Mo, I know that you've sent a coded message. You know that we can't intercept these messages, and you're not afraid that we'll intercept them either. You've gone to great lengths to send the same message through various channels, and although you've intercepted 99% of the messages, there are still some that we missed. However, these missed messages didn't make it out of Sector C. You may not know this, but Sector C has set up an information defense network with dozens of technical and engineering academicians working together with the former League of Stars Research Institute. Other than the people on the 8 Marshals side, it's very difficult for other messages to pass through this network." Mo-hung opened his eyes, but he didn't look too disappointed. In fact, Mo-hung didn't have much hope in the message either. "Never mind, let it be intercepted. They can't decipher the message even if they intercepted it anyway." Mo-hung had absolute confidence in this. The middle-aged man looked at Mo-hung and continued, "However, I've sent the message for you. I think you want to contact someone or some of your former students." After a moment of silence, Mo-hung said, "Stop beating around the bush." The middle-aged man smiled. He didn't mind Mo-hung's stinky expression at all. He maintained his previous speed and tone. "When I first entered Seven Lights, the reason I applied to work under you was because I saw your ability in academia that those worthless academicians couldn't compare to. As it turns out, you didn't disappoint me either. It's true that I can't decipher that coded message, and until now, no one has been able to decipher it. Even if they can decipher it, I believe it's not the correct message. The last diagram is your latest research result, am I right?" Mo-hung still wore that stinky expression on his face. Mo-hung had protected the Mo Matrix's research results very well, and he knew all too well about the dirty ways of stealing academic results in academia. That was why he had protected his research results very well ever since he stepped into the academic circle. This time, Mo-hung had sensed it beforehand and deleted all relevant information. "You want to steal my research results? Not a chance. I'm guessing that you want to inform your students of something, so I passed this message to the students you've taught. Other than the few who died, everyone else should have received it by now, including your favorite student." Seeing that Mo-hung's expression was gradually turning subtle, the middle-aged man took out a device the size of an egg from his pocket and drew a shape on it with his finger. Then, the device projected an image on a hologram. "As for your favorite student, I have a new message for you." On the hologram, a man clad in full armor was running on the surface of the transport. He was incredibly fast and agile, and every step he took was steady against the surface of the transport. He couldn't see the clumsiness and lag limitations of any other space protective armor. But the real thing that made Mo-hung's adrenaline skyrocket was the scene where Silen assembled a cannon barrel with a wave of his hand. That scene was indeed very shocking. The collision of the lightning and the giant mouth, the strong visual impact, as well as the small figure wearing armor, made everyone who saw this scene uncontrollably excited. After turning off the hologram, the middle-aged man said, "I know that you've been in contact with him. It's said that he disappeared for almost 3 years, and no one knew about it. But I think you should know about it, right? That weapon is also your new research result, right? In fact, he disappeared for almost 3 years to help you complete this result, isn't that right?" Mo Hung closed his eyes and said nothing. He hadn't completely calmed down yet. Without looking at the man, Mo Hung returned to silence. However, Mo Hung's reaction convinced the middle-aged man of his guess. To him, Mo Hung had participated in the Nightmare Taper project, so it was not impossible for him to create a weapon. However, Mo Hung's temperament was a little strange. He wouldn't easily give his own results to his son. Every research result had to be tested and improved many times before it was made public, and this work was either done by him alone or with the help of his students. Therefore, Silan must belong to the latter group. He had gotten someone to leak the information to Mo Hung's other students. He was now collecting the final decoding information of each of his students. However, there was nothing about Silan. That was the exact reason why the middle-aged man believed his guess even more. Mo Hung was definitely the one who had sent that message to Celine. The content of the information must be about his research results. "I really don't understand why you've been giving the results to your disciple instead of your son who needs them now. Perhaps to great teacher Mo, a son is nothing compared to his disciple." As expected of Mo Hung. "Say, Saran Mbixen, my friend, are you done with your nonsense? If you're done, get lost. This old man wants to take a nap. Old people hate having their naps interrupted." The middle-aged man smiled. "Of course. Have a good rest." The middle-aged man left after saying that. His pace was not affected by the unpleasant conversation at all. He walked at a steady pace, every step like a machine. After Mbixen had left, Mo Hung opened his eyes and sat up. He stared at the parts on the table for a while before starting to assemble them. Mo Hung's hands were itchy if he didn't touch any machinery for a day. Those people also knew Mo Hung's personality, so they had placed some mechanical parts and other related items in his room. Who knew what kind of amazing gadgets this academic ruffian would come up with? Unfortunately, Mo Hung hadn't come up with anything amazing. He had been piecing together some more common machinery. Mo Hung's son knew that Mo Hung was under house arrest, but there was no way to rescue him now. Moreover, he knew his father's personality all too well. He didn't side with the CI family because of threats, but rather, the CI family. Mo Hung knew that if he really did side with the old master because he was under house arrest, the old master would probably kill himself and write a notice to sever all ties with him before doing so. Mo Hung was very pleased with his son's performance, so he was only a little thinner after being trapped here, but he was still in good spirits. Right now, Mo Hung was humming a tune as he assembled the machine. It didn't take long for the workshop door to open again. This time, it wasn't the middle-aged man called Mbixen, but an old man about the same age as Mo Hung. The old man was also wearing the same work clothes. "Yo, old ruffian Mo, you seem to be in a good mood. Have you thought things through?" "Like hell I'm thinking things through." Mo Hung didn't stop assembling the machine even though his speed was as slow as a child's. Anyone who knew Mo Hung would know that he didn't like to be disturbed when he was truly immersed in his work. Don't talk to him or it'll affect his concentration. Moreover, Mo Hung wouldn't hum a tune when he was working seriously, and his assembling speed wouldn't be this slow. Mo Hung tossed the parts in his hands aside and lay back down on his bed, propping his legs on the table. Old man said, "You're also an engineer. Tell me, what do you think we're after? Do you mean on the surface or in the dark? If it's on the surface, then we're after the golden point. If you're asking in the dark, then of course it's reputation and influence. Because everyone knows that it's impossible to reach the golden point. Those who are considered to be the closest to the golden point are just so. I also don't agree with those people. However, the theoretical value of the golden point, even if it's impossible to reach it, it's infinitely close. You continue to be stubborn. This thing can only be used to deceive the greenhorns who have just entered the circle, and to bluff those laymen. This is just an excuse to add gold to the technology of this industry. Moreover, with your current body, you still want the golden point? It's hard to even get the silver point. Said with disdain. TSK, look at your cowardice. This old man has a disciple. Chapter 347. Everyone in the circle knew that Mo Hung had a very good disciple, because Mo Hung always bragged about this disciple. In Mo Hung's words, the word disciple appeared more often than son. However, not many people had seen this disciple of his, and the people who investigated Silin were often stopped by their own side. As a fellow of the League of Stars Research Institute, Said had naturally heard about this. However, he didn't participate in the engineering project at Sector Z due to his body condition, so he didn't get to see the disciple Mo Hung spoke of. However, he did hear from a couple of old guys involved in the project that the disciple was good, just a little too young. Just like old ruffian Mo, he specialized in pissing people off. However, Said curled his lips when he thought of their current situation. You're not expecting your disciple to save you from this place, are you? It wasn't that Said wanted to discourage Mo Hung, but the current situation wasn't something they could easily change. When the League of Stars was still relatively stable, famous people like them in the academic world still had some face, and the military, politicians, and business tycoons who didn't care about money would more or less respect them. But now, the League of Stars Research Institute scholars, whether they were 1-star or 5-star, were basically forced to join in. Those who didn't were running away like fugitives, not even daring to show themselves for fear of being dragged into this mess. Even Mo Hung, who was thought to have a stronger background, couldn't avoid it. After all, he had a son who was a general. Although he was treated well, he couldn't deny the fact that he was a prisoner. If Mo Hung had heard Said's words before, he would have been irritated. But not now. Mo Hung was in a good mood, so good that Said found it odd. Sigh, old ruffian Mo, what are you planning? Every time I see you smiling with your eyes squinted, it makes me nervous. Said nudged Mo Hung, who was lying there leisurely without any negative reaction to his words. It's nothing. I was just thinking that I might be able to see a new record that's closer to the golden point. Glory, one of the two major electronic publications in the League of Stars, had a list on it, the gold list. The people listed on it were considered to be the closest to the gold list. Moreover, every name on it was a legend in the industry, a textbook authority. People like Mo Hung all hoped to appear on that list one day, but Mo Hung knew that he wouldn't have that chance. However, Mo Hung was very happy that his disciple could compete and even break the record of the top 10 rankings. In the video Bishin showed Mo Hung, what Mo Hung really paid attention to was not the special armor Silin was wearing, nor how powerful the strange weapon was, but the way Silin assembled the weapon. It had been almost 3 years since they last met, and Celine's movements had become even more adept. She was also filled with confidence. Mo Hung already had a shocking number in his heart for being able to perform nearly perfectly in that short period of time. It was just that Mo Hung had never dared to actually take out this number. He wanted to take another look and confirm it. Celine's assembly made Mo Hung feel as if he could see the shining golden dot, the golden dot that he had been searching for his entire life. Said was helpless to see Mo Hung's reaction. Why do you think the world of academia has become like this? The status of academics in the League of Stars' academic community was nowhere near as high as their counterparts in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Moreover, under the influence of such a big environment, without a strong support from behind, without a person to act as a go-between, it would be impossible to purely do what one wanted to do. The world of academia had always been an appendage to the military, political, and business world. In the past, it still had its glory, but now, its former glory was even more shameful. Which other family in the world of academia could stand up for themselves except the CI family? It was true that the CI family had fought for a lot of benefits for those in the academic world, but their main focus was on the world of politics and military. Moreover, the Heavenly Edict warrior of the CI family had absolutely nothing to do with academia, so why would he use his connections for some matters in the academic world? Said didn't believe it at all. Wouldn't it be great if there was a person who could stand at the top and truly think for our community one day? Said sighed emotionally. There will be, Mo Hung said softly while tossing a component in his hand. Said smiled mockingly. There will be. Who? Those Heavenly Edict warriors who are famous for their martial prowess and military merits? Or those old foxes in the political world who only want to climb to the top and reap benefits? Or maybe businessmen who only care about profit? Don't even think about those boorish hunters. Don't even think about counting on them. Mo Hung chuckled. I can't, I really can't. Never mind, I'm done talking to you. I need to get back to work. That bastard in Bishin really is a monster. Why do you think he's so obsessed with that thing? He threw out another batch this morning. Mo Hung fell silent at the mention of this. His heart felt a little heavy. What did he throw out? Humans, of course. And Bishin's experiments were conducted on soldiers captured from battles, and excellent ones at that. Live experiments. But by now, the soldiers who died due to failed experiments or experiments had been disposed of like garbage. There's a saying that's true. Those who stand at the top of academia are either freaks or madmen. Said shook his head and left after saying this. Mo Hung stared at the ceiling quietly after Said left. After a while, he murmured, Kid, will you do as I say? But you've always been disobedient. Vanguard Headquarters. After decoding Mo Hung's message, Silen secretly contacted Ji Feng and told him about the person who sent the decoded message. Silen did not mention the specific reason for his suspicion, nor did he tell Ji Feng about Mo Hung's message. If Ji Feng could find out, he would let him do it. After all, it was a squadron's business. Silen just happened to find it and told Ji Feng about it. Alright, I'll get someone to look into it. What are you planning to do, kid? Ji Feng asked Silen with interest. Something personal. Since Silen said it was a personal matter, Ji Feng didn't ask further. Be careful. Do you need more people? There are still a lot of good seedlings who haven't chosen a team yet. No need. I don't care if they don't want to come. Ji Feng smiled as he thought of the message he received. Beating up a squadron and dragging them into the base. You guys are really something. In the entire Vanguard, except for the two most trusted people around Ji Feng, no one else knew about the close relationship between Silen and Ji Feng. If they knew, those who were still hesitant at the time would definitely decide to stay. After chatting with Silen, Ji Feng picked up the communicator. Soali, send someone to keep an eye on them. Put them on the priority list. Kill them when the time is right. Yes, boss. The other side replied. Ji Feng's eyes were dark. He crossed his fingers and moved them intermittently. As expected, Vanguard needed a few bloody lessons to wake up. They had been known as one of the Big Four for so long that they'd forgotten about it. They had to fight for it with their lives. After Silen and the others left, Ji Feng held another meeting with the higher-ups. Ji Feng wasn't as calm as before. Everyone could sense his anger and killing intent. At the same time, Ji Feng sent a message to them: betrayal meant death. Hunter regiments had their own rules. There were no laws to restrict them. The rules of the hunters were even crueler. When Silen saw the 5 newcomers again, Mogaz was talking to Little 11 from the space station through the communicator. Only Little 11 was willing to listen to him because the others couldn't handle his chatterbox at all. Mogaz didn't know what they were arguing about, but he said into the communicator, "Don't you use your brain? Wait, don't you use your CPU? Let me tell you, think carefully when you speak to others in the future. You'll get shot if you say something wrong." While Mogaz was still arguing with Little 11, the others were already looking at Silen. Sillin rested in his room for 2 days. No one disturbed him during this time. Apart from a series of arguments caused by 2A squad missions, nothing much happened in Vanguard. "Captain, should we stay here and build a base? Or should we go hunting?" Xiao Shang asked while stretching his limbs. It was obvious that he couldn't wait to get out. "Do you want to build a base?" Sillin asked. "No." Everyone answered in unison. "Then let's go hunting." As soon as Sillin said this, Yudi handed him a mission list. There were all kinds of missions on it. All of them had one thing in common. The locations were relatively remote and inconspicuous, and the missions weren't given by anyone else. They were self-made, and they were more likely to be used as practice. Everyone was probably ready to try out that armor. After looking through the mission list, Sillin handed it to Yudi. "Choose 3 first." Yudi paused for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." He knew that Sillin must have other plans. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen just 3. These missions might seem like a lot to others, but it would save them a lot of time if they were given the right armor. After all, they weren't missions that required a lot of manpower. "Qiuqiu, come here for a second." Sillin waved at Tang Qiuqiu. Tang Qiuqiu was just about to open a new can of candy, but she hurriedly put down the can and followed after him. Before she left, she didn't forget to warn Xueqiu and Huimao not to touch her can of candy, or else she would shoot them with her gun. "No way, Captain. You're going to take a private photo of Tang Qiuqiu," Carrie yelled. Ignoring Carrie's deliberate whining, Sillin led Tang Qiuqiu to the indoor shooting range. After entering the shooting range, Sillin had Tang Qiuqiu put on a bulletproof suit. Tang Qiuqiu didn't say anything and put on her own suit. "I won't use your gun this time. I'll use this one. I'll demonstrate it first. You watch." Sillin took out a gun he'd made in his spare time after returning to the League of Stars. There was a snake-shaped symbol on the gun that looked like a lightning bolt. This was authorized by Guan Feng, so Sillin wasn't afraid of Guan Feng twisting his ear. This was a Purgatory Thunder Snake, but it was a beginner-grade Type B model. Bang! After Sillin opened fire, the rapidly flickering target was hit right in the bullseye. Tang Qiuqiu could see clearly that Sillin wasn't pointing at the target. She understood why Sillin had her wear the bulletproof suit. "What do you think?" Sillin asked. "I want to give it a try." Tang Qiuqiu's eyes lit up. Sillin handed the gun to Tang Qiuqiu. Tang Qiuqiu held the gun for a moment, then raised it. She wasn't as decisive as before because she hadn't found the feeling yet. Strangely enough, this was the first time she'd felt so lost holding a gun ever since she'd gotten used to it. After a pause, Tang Qiuqiu opened fire. Her first shot didn't hit any target. Instead, it hit Tang Qiuqiu herself by mistake. It only grazed her left arm, and because she was wearing the bulletproof suit, she wasn't affected too much. Standing there, Tang Qiuqiu frowned. She thought about it for a moment, then fired again. This shot still didn't hit the target, but the good news was that the target was a lot further away from her. Third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot, although the bullets didn't hit the target, they were getting closer to the target. After every shot, the next shot would always be closer to the target. Even if the target kept changing its position, it couldn't change the fact that the bullets were slowly getting closer to the target. Ding! On the 8th shot, the bullet hit the target. Although it didn't hit the bullseye, it still hit the target. On the 9th shot, Tang Qiuqiu's shot was decisive. It was as if she wasn't holding the Purgatory Thunder Snake, but the gun she was used to. Even without the system notification, Sillin knew that she'd hit the target this time. She hadn't gone to school or received any formal education. She didn't even know how to calculate those complicated ballistic formulas. Everything was based on instinct and her innate ability to shoot. Even Sillin didn't have this kind of talent. Sillin was good at calculation, but Tang Qiuqiu was a true shooting genius. After the 9th shot, Tang Qiuqiu fired 5 more times in a row. All 5 shots hit the target. Adjust the target and practice on your own. Just now, Silen had received a notice from Cheto that he would be leaving for a while. Okay. Tang Qiuqiu was already engrossed in the game like a child who had just received a new toy. Outside the shooting range, Carrie and the others were stunned. A long time later, Xiao Shang finally said, Tang Qiuqiu really is a natural-born marksman. But why is there such a huge gap between us? Carrie rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Could it be that she ate too many sweets? Silen returned to his room and found Cheto waiting for him. How did it go? Silen asked. I did. There's a communication request, Cheto answered. Connect it. Okay. Cheto had just finished speaking when a beam of light shot out of his left eye and formed a hologram in front of him. Long time no see, Silen, the person on the hologram said with a smile. It had been almost 3 years. Although the person's aura had changed a little, it was still the same familiar face and the same voice that always gnashed his teeth at Huimao. Long time no see, Lycrabe, no, I should call you the 4th young master now, Shi Huajing. Chapter 348. Shi Huajing had always been grateful to Celine. After all, it was Celine who had brought him away from that kind of situation and allowed him to step into the vast starry sky again. Are you in trouble? The 11th squad? Shi Huajing asked. No, it's a private matter. How's the situation on your side right now? Silen said. Shi Huajing was currently at Sector A, the sector surrounded by many political organizations. The League of Stars' political organizations might not be as strong as the military in terms of military strength, but they were just as influential as the military in terms of decision-making. The political leaders were all influential people, and the Shi family had quite a few of them. Silen explained his thoughts and some related problems, but he didn't go into detail about Mo Heng. Wait, I'll check it out. Shi Huajing used his own channels to investigate the information provided by Silen. Then, he frowned deeply. Miracle Corporation? Why are you in trouble again? Miracle's high-end bioweapons and genetic medicines were famous in the League of Stars, and many people knew about them. The genetic transformation medicine produced by Miracle was the most successful and expensive medicine in the entire League of Stars. Silen had a conflict with Miracle in the past, and this time it was the same company again. You should know that Miracle's plan 2 years ago drove the entire League of Stars crazy, and it received great support from both the military and the government, Shi Huajing said. Speaking of Miracle's plan, Silen only learned about it after he returned to the League of Stars from the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The so-called plan was to create 10,000 people with A-rank genes within 24 hours. The media reported that after more than 10,000 people with B-rank or C-rank genes were injected with the new gene medicine of the Miracle company, they created the miracle of creating 10,000 A-rank genes overnight. Such a success rate had indeed caused a strong sensation. Even in such a relatively chaotic environment, the Miracle company was still able to obtain strong support from behind, and not just from one side. The chaotic environment also provided them with enough test subjects and enough reasons to experiment. There was no need to worry about the funds needed for the experiment. More people were begging them to do the experiment. In the past, he had to cover up on the surface, but now he didn't need to. I want to sneak in there. Can you help me? Silen asked. If you can solve the joint defense network at the edge of Sector C, I can help you with the rest. Shi Huajing said confidently. Have you settled things on your side? Something like that. Shi Huajing wasn't the only young master of this generation of the Shi family. Although Shi Huajing was ranked 4th, he was the rightful heir of the Shi family. It would have been fine if he hadn't returned to the Shi family. After all, he had been away from home for so many years that everyone had probably forgotten about him. Many people also thought that he had committed suicide along with his suicidal mother. But now, Shi Huajing was back, and as soon as he returned to the Shur family, he received strong support from several powerful figures and his mother's side. They can't wait for me to come back, because now I'm looking for a business partner. Back then, my parents didn't get along, so there was a gap between the two families. So, in the current environment, I can be considered to have provided them with an opportunity, a way out. If they don't support me, who will? Those pieces of trash. Shi Huajing snorted. Shi Huajing had taught his half-brothers a lesson the moment he returned, and two of them were nearly beaten to death for provoking him. However, the head of the Shi family didn't even let out a fart after the incident. Ever since then, the Shi family had officially started treating the fourth young master of the Shi family in a new light. Although Shi Huajing was known as the fourth young master, not even the first young master or the second young master could compare to a single word from the fourth young master. There were a lot of people in a political family who knew how to act according to the situation. Needless to say, those people had been expressing goodwill to Shi Huajing both openly and covertly since a long time ago. Moreover, Shi Huajing was capable and resourceful. He was the best in his generation, and the Shi family would be proud of him. We'll talk about the specifics after you come to Sector A. I'll arrange for someone to pick you up and notify you as soon as it's done. Okay. After the connection was cut off, Silan looked at the information on the screen. It was a report about the planet Shi Huajing had just sent him. It wasn't detailed, but the fact that he was able to get his hands on this information meant that Shi Huajing was doing pretty well right now. There was a research base belonging to Miracle Corporation on the planet, and it was known as the Ultra Project Research Base. The so-called Ultra Project was a project that surpassed A-rank genetics. Right now, a project like this was highly sought after by all parties, so there had to be a lot of supporters behind it. Silan couldn't afford to expose himself. He couldn't afford to bring too many people with him if he didn't want to expose himself. However, there was no way they could go up against the trained and biomodified defense forces inside the base. Silan was going to prepare a gift specifically for their experiment. Walking out of the lounge, Silan arrived at the shooting range. Tang Kakikyu was practicing her shooting, and the automatic target setup had reached a very complicated level. The system reported a series of center hits, and it had only been an hour since Tang Kakikyu first held the Purgatory Thundersnake B. Alright, Chiu-Chiu, you can stop now, Silan said, interrupting Tang Kakikyu who was in the middle of shooting excitedly. Hearing this, Tang Chiu-Chiu reluctantly stopped. Just as she was about to remove the helmet on the protective suit, Silan stopped her. Silan took out another gun with the same pattern on it, but the shape was a little different from the previous one. Tang Kakikyu's eyes lit up, and she ran over, throwing the regret of being interrupted to the back of her mind. She hurriedly asked, "Is this the upgraded version?" "Yes, the one you used earlier was the B-type, and this is the E-type. The B-type is a cylindrical bullet, while the E-type is a spiral bullet. The trajectory of the spiral bullet is even more unpredictable, but I don't think you'll think about the trajectory. I have to remind you that this isn't as easy to learn as the B-type." Just like before, Silan fired a shot first as a demonstration. He did not say anything else and passed the gun directly to Tang Chiu-Chiu. "Chiu-Chiu, this gun is called the Purgatory Thundersnake, and it was invented by a man called Guan Feng. If you can use the E-type well, I'll take you to meet him in the future. Maybe he'll like you a lot and design a Purgatory Thundersnake for you." "Okay." Tang Chiu-Chiu was overjoyed, but then she thought of something and asked Silan, "What else is there besides the B-type and E-type?" "There's also the K-type for flake bullets and the S-type for hexagon bullets. However, the latter two have higher requirements on your constitution, so don't just focus on shooting. You should train harder as well." "I know. But my constitution is innate, and it's not easy to improve it. There aren't any people with rank A genotypes in my neighborhood, so I won't be as strong as Carrie and the others no matter how hard I try. I'll probably have to inject a genetic medicine when the time comes." Tang Chiu-Chiu was a little worried about this. Although the success rate of genetic medicines had increased a lot, she still didn't trust them. "Don't worry about that. I'll think of something for you." "Okay." Thanks, big bro. Tang Qiuqiu was in high spirits right now. After checking her protective suit, she began a new round of shooting practice. Just like Sillin said, the E-type was a lot harder to learn than the B-type. But Tang Qiuqiu was confident. While Tang Qiuqiu practiced shooting alone, Sillin went back to his lab after saying goodbye to Yudi. Hey, our captain knows so much. Mogaz watched as Sillin walked into the lab and poked Huimao, who was licking his claws. Ever since Mogaz joined the A-team, he had seen many captains and core members of the A-team. However, most of them didn't have their own research labs, and even if they did, it was only out of interest. They weren't experts in the field of research, so they didn't have their own research labs. This captain, however, was different. Huimao glanced at him and said lazily, "Don't be surprised. Sillin is probably up to something again. I'm afraid a bunch of people are going to suffer." Mogaz was very curious about Huimao's words, but Huimao didn't say anything. Instead, it opened a bag of fish biscuits and started eating. Based on its experience following Sillin for so many years, it knew that a new mission was about to arrive even if it wasn't eavesdropping. It wasn't hard to imagine how difficult it would be if Sillin was so serious that he had to come up with some dirty tricks. That was why Huimao decided to eat as much as he could to conserve his energy before the mission began. 10 days later, Sillin came out of his lab. After learning about the recent developments in Vanguard and the League of Stars from Beaver, he ate a big meal and slept for 2 days straight. When Sillin woke up, he summoned the 11th Squad for a meeting. Every base had a meeting hall, but since the 11th Squad was so small, they didn't go there. Instead, they chose a suitable meeting room. Shikai and Shimu are a little busy right now. We'll have to wait for 10 minutes, Tiko said as she walked into the meeting room. Sillin nodded. Then we'll wait for 10 minutes. Aside from Shikai and Shimu, everyone else was sitting in the meeting room. This was the first important meeting the entire squad had since the addition of new members. While everyone was chatting casually, Mogaz suddenly let out a scream and rolled off his chair. He clutched his stomach and whimpered in pain. His scream drew everyone's attention, but the other 4 new members reacted very strangely. After seeing Mogaz's condition, they turned their heads away and stared at his feet as if they hadn't seen anything. "Hey, Mogaz, what's wrong?" Carrie asked. Mogaz clutched his stomach with a conflicted expression. "Period pains. Everyone." Phoebe covered her face with her hands. "This is so embarrassing. I knew this guy wouldn't say anything nice. Those who didn't know better would think that the A squad members were all crazy." Tiko was just about to check on Mogaz's condition when her eyes twitched and she sat back down. Scarlet Wind, who was about to ask for an explanation, shut his mouth after Tang Qiuqiu knocked on his gun barrel. With his experience, he knew that it wasn't anything good the moment Tang Qiuqiu knocked on his gun barrel. Sillin stared expressionlessly at the rolling Mogaz for 2 seconds before waving at Qiuqiu. "Throw him out." "Hey! Don't. Mogaz, who had been rolling on the ground in agony, crawled to his feet and chuckled. "Just kidding, I'm having diarrhea. I'm going out for a bit. Everyone, wait for me, I'll be back soon." After that, Mogaz dodged Qiuqiu's giant palm and ran out of the room. "How did he get diarrhea?" Xiao Shang asked. Cheto answered, "He ate a fish biscuit from Weeze's paw." Under everyone's puzzled gazes, Cheto explained, "It hasn't washed its paw for days, so there are at least 10 types of bacteria in it that can cause gastrointestinal dysfunction." Everyone turned to look at Huimao, who was licking his paw nonchalantly. Man really can't be compared to Lord Cat. Huimao would pay attention to his surroundings when they were on the starship, and there were a lot of automatic sterilization devices on the starship. Huimao did pay attention to them, but his wild nature was exposed as soon as they were on land. Moreover, Sillin had been busy lately, so Huimao couldn't be bothered to clean his paw. In fact, he didn't even bother to get rid of the bacteria on his paw even though he had the ability to. He was perfectly fine on his own anyway. Sillin knew that Hui Mao was doing this on purpose the moment he saw the smug look on Hui Mao's face. Cheto cooperated and didn't tell Mogaz about the strange bacteria inside his paw either. Otherwise, how could a few common bacteria cause diarrhea to a man of Mogaz's constitution? Hui Mao just wanted to teach that bastard a lesson, that's all. 10 minutes later, Shi Kai, Shi Mu, and a refreshed Mogaz finally entered the room. Once everyone was present, Sillin began explaining the upcoming itinerary. Yudi and Dias will be in charge of guiding the missions circled on the list. Sillin explained the follow-up missions and the things they needed to pay attention to. He also analyzed the current situation of the hunter forces and the information they learned from the A Squad's meeting not long ago. The more they listened, the more they noticed that something was wrong. A few people were missing from the mission list. What about you, Commander? Mogaz asked. Cheto, Shu Sag, and I have other matters to attend to. We'll be separating from the rest of you. This is the 11th Squad's top secret. After the meeting was over, Sillin received a call from Ji Feng. We've taken care of that bastard and removed some of his nails. It's all thanks to you that our squad would have run into some internal trouble again, Ji Feng said. Seeing that Ji Feng was in a good mood today, Sillin asked, what's the good news? Lan Hudi has begun his revenge. Oh. Heaven's Birth is going to suffer a lot of losses. After learning about this, Celine also felt that this was a good opportunity. After all, with Blue Butterfly and Heaven's Birth's battle as a cover, it would be easier for him to act. Ji Feng clearly knew that Sillin thought that this was his opportunity. Not only did he contact Sillin to inform him about the spy's death, but he also told him about Lan Hudi and Heaven's Birth situation beforehand. The other B squadrons would learn about this later, so Sillin got a first-hand piece of information. When do you plan to depart? Ji Feng asked. In the next 2 days. Not long after the call ended, Sillin received an encrypted message from Cheto. The message was from Shihua Jing. He had arranged for someone to meet him at a famous sanatorium in Sector E. When the time came, all he had to do was look for that person directly. Chapter 349. Ever since Sillin's 11th Squad's return, it had attracted a lot of attention. After the meeting, the 11th Squad became a hot topic of conversation for many people. It became a laughingstock that even spread to the other hunter regiments. It was because no one was willing to go with the 11th Squad. How could they not become a laughingstock when only 5 of the several hundred people that were assigned to the Vanguard Division went with them? Regardless of whether it was due to some people's conjecture that the 11th Squad was an elite squad or that they were just following the public opinion, it didn't change the fact that most people weren't optimistic about the Vanguard Division. This was especially true given the current complicated circumstances. A squad of 20 or so people wasn't even close to being enough. It was a disgrace to the Vanguard Division. After all, they were one of the Big Four. Moreover, Vanguard did not have a special management style like Blue Butterfly. They focused on scale and manpower. So, naturally, Team 11 was ranked last in the Vanguard team in terms of overall strength. However, Sillin didn't mind. If he, the captain, didn't have any opinion on this, then the others wouldn't mind making a fuss. There would be plenty of time to prove their strength in the future. As for the 5 new members, they felt that they had made the right decision, especially after receiving the armor Shimu had given them. Their armor was different from the others. It wasn't made according to their strengths or weaknesses. Shimu was still observing the 5 newcomers. If the 5 of them performed well during the mission and left a good impression on Shimu, he wouldn't mind modifying their armor. However, if they did anything to harm the 11th Squad's interests, Shimu wouldn't waste his energy on custom-made armor for them. Forget the custom-made armor, he'd even take back the armor he'd given to the 11th Squad. Since he could give them away, he had a way to take them back without missing a single one. Of the 11 squads that returned to the Vanguard Division, 6 had already left. After Sillin told everyone to get ready, he applied to leave the base as well. Hey, little 11, we finally meet. Mogaz greeted Little 11 as he stood in front of the starship inside the space station. It's nice to meet you all. Oh right, I've already prepared your rooms. You can decorate the rest yourself, Little 11's voice came from the starship. With this super AI, there was no need for Scylla and the others to take care of the trivial matters on the starship. Little 11 could do it on his own. The 6 teams that had previously left the headquarters had already acted as good pathfinders. The route that Scylla had drawn up would avoid some unnecessary trouble and allow them to leave as soon as possible to save time. After explaining the route to Little 11, the 11th Squadron set off again. Since they had made ample preparations beforehand, the 11th Squad didn't run into any trouble until they left Sector K. The scattered hunter groups they ran into along the way didn't attack the 11th Squad's starship either. This greatly disappointed the eager crew who had just received their armor not long ago. The 11th party had a code of confidentiality, and the 5 newcomers had no objections to it. Some good things couldn't be shared with others, especially in the hunter class. There was already a shortage of internal resources, so who would be willing to share them? The 11 squads of Vanguard were all developed on their own, relying on their own abilities. No one was a philanthropist, and hunter was a risky profession. The longer they stayed in contact with the 11th squad, the more surprised they became. The 11th squad might be small, but they were quite capable. Other than the armor and the successful implantation of the super AI into the starship, they also received a communication notification the moment they left Sector K. It didn't take long for a transport ship to contact the 11th squad and deliver a large amount of resources to them. Mogaz scurried back and forth as he looked at the boxes of food. Is there something going on between the 11th squad and the Smiling Face Corporation? These are all pretty good things, and they're practically luxurious at the current market price. Not even we had the privilege of eating food of this quality when we went on a mission with the A squad. Mogaz took out a bag of jerky from one of the crates, opened it, and ate it. The aftertaste lingered on his face. Mogaz hurriedly wiped his mouth when he saw the smug look on Carrie's face. Then, he leaned over and asked why they were so generous. Carrie smiled mysteriously. It's not because of us. The only reason we're able to get these resources at such a low price is because of our captain. Mogaz shot a glance at Scylla, who was talking to the person in charge of the transport, and then at Huimao, who was walking back and forth with his tail between his legs. Is our captain this nice to his pets as well? The price of the dozen or so crates of fish biscuits wasn't a small amount. Oh, you mean that? We didn't spend a cent on that. It's Lord Cat's profit. Mogaz rubbed his chin and muttered, why do I feel like the 5 of us are taking advantage of him? After receiving the resources, the 11th Squad's starship sailed straight to its first mission destination. They passed by a place close to Sector E, and it was there that Scylla left with Cheto, Shusag, and the others. At the same time, 3 robots that looked identical to Scylla, Shusag, and Cheto appeared on the 11th Squad starship. They were there to act as cover for them. Scylla piloted a small spaceplane towards Sector E. Compared to the last time Scylla visited Sector E was a lot busier right now. The chaotic battlefields scattered all over the place had seriously injured more people than usual. Those with money and ability would come to Sector E to seek medical attention. After all, Sector E's medical care was more trustworthy and perfect. Ever since the League of Stars' turmoil began, the prices of goods in Sector E were generally high, not to mention the price of medicine and treatment. Therefore, most of the people who came to Sector E were people with money. As for the big families, they had their own powerful medical teams to begin with. Now that they had recruited some of the best medical talents in Sector E with high salaries, the loss of medical talents in Sector E only exacerbated the rise in medical costs. Scylla looked at the treatment list of some of the sanatoriums. In the past, it would have been enough to perform a full induction treatment and post-treatment repair, but now it was only enough to perform a partial induction treatment, and that didn't include the post-treatment repair and other follow-up measures. Shusag was very curious about this sector. There were no functional sectors like this in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and most of the medical professionals were distributed among the nobles. The rest of them were either affiliated with the RAS or hidden in places unknown to the public. Shusag couldn't help but click his tongue when he saw the price of the treatment list. Seriously, they can't even afford to be injured. What if a normal person lost an arm or leg or something, and they couldn't afford advanced treatment? Wouldn't that be terrible? Those who can afford it will replace it with a mechanical arm for now. Those who can't even afford it have no choice but to endure it, Silan answered. While they were talking, they saw a piece of local news. The gist of the message was that a man who thought he had some money and came out to show off ran into space robbers and had both his legs chopped off. He escaped with his remaining money and came to Sector E for treatment, only to discover that the money he had was only enough to treat one leg, and the recovery treatment was barely enough to cover the cost. There was no way he could pay for both legs at all, and his life was difficult after treatment. The people around him would mock and ridicule him from time to time, and in the end, the man couldn't bear the contrast and committed suicide. Shusag said, "I think there are only two kinds of people who can accept it, and those who can't. Back then, I escaped from that kind of situation with my bastard son and lived like a rat in the sewers. At first, I was a beggar myself. I had no background, and I couldn't even use my real identity. I couldn't use my connections, and all my hard work and honor were denied. I didn't know how to do anything other than work as a laborer. When I was working as a laborer, I was pointed at and scolded all day, and I couldn't resist or show any emotions. I also couldn't expose the fact that I was a mutant. Otherwise, I would be fired and ostracized. If that happened, my son and I would lose our food money. Other people got to eat, drink, and buy gifts for their children. But what about me? I was greedy and worked my ass off at the construction site for a measly wage. I was as lowly as a pile of dried bird poop that fell from a great height and smashed into pieces. Speaking of which, I aged really fast during those years, and the little bit of pride and sharpness I had in the military turned into a weathered old man. But no matter what, I made it through. The luckiest part of me is meeting you, Captain. Hee hee. Shusag put his arm around Silan and Cheto before pointing his chin at the fat cat not far away. What do you think they think about animals like that? In their opinion, there are two kinds of animals, edible and inedible, right? Silan shook his head. No, you're talking about other animals. To that fatty, there are only two kinds of animals, delicious and inedible. I don't think there's anything that's inedible to it. On the other side, the person in question was bending over and pressing his ears. His two front paws retracted slightly to adjust his position. Then, he suddenly jumped up and slapped down a pigeon that had snatched the bread crumbs. Then, he bit a hole in the butt of a parked flying car and stuffed the dizzy pigeon inside. Then, he bit a hole in the building next to the flying car and plugged the hole in the flying car. Not long after, a couple who were having sex inside the flying car let out a cry of surprise and opened the roof to chase the pigeon away. As for the flying car alarm that the owner was complaining about, it was useless against Huimao. Silan dragged the laughing Huimao over to him and walked toward a very large sanatorium. Although the sanatorium's treatment fees had increased several times over, there were still a lot of patients who came here for treatment. The person Silan was looking for wasn't in the treatment area at the front of the sanatorium, but the recovery area at the back. First floor, room 108, Flanders. The guard checked the ID and received permission from the patient inside the recovery room. Then, he let Silan and the others in, assuming that they were here to visit a patient. Silan walked into the recovery room and saw his target, the only patient in the room, Flanders. He was lying on his bed enjoying a massage while watching the news. Chapter 350. Flanders looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. His face was a little pale due to his injuries, but he was in good spirits. There was no way he was faking his recovery in this place. According to the information Sillin obtained from Shi Huajing, Flanders used to be a pharmaceutical businessman from a famous school. He came from a medium-sized family, and the company he took over was a family business. They produced a lot of drugs, but most of them were aimed at the middle and low end of the market. That being said, the fact that he hadn't been swallowed up by other big families was a testament to his ability. Unlike the rulers of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, most of the people in charge of the League of Stars had real talent. Even if they weren't the most outstanding, they still had a solid foundation. Unlike nobles like Zhen Xingming who enjoyed absolute privileges, they wouldn't fool around like that. After the League of Stars fell into chaos, Shi Huajing decided to work with Flanders. Flanders might be an insignificant force to other people, but Shi Huajing definitely had his reasons for choosing him, and he was a partner he absolutely trusted. There were some newspapers beside Flanders, and some of the images on them were like books from the heavens to Shusag. They were either molecular diagrams of drugs or the principles behind a newly developed drug. Even if it was an advertisement, it had to be a medical product. Shusag's head was spinning just looking at it. Flanders was lying on his bed and watching the news. When he saw Sillin and Flanders, his gaze landed on Hui Mao, who was lying obediently in Sillin's arms and looking around restlessly. He smiled and said, "You came just in time. I was planning to leave the hospital in a couple of days." Sillin didn't know if Flanders was telling the truth when he said that he came just in time, but he had to admit that he was someone Shi Huajing trusted. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that Wheeze was a special cat. His gaze on Hui Mao just now was to verify their identities. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Flanders. I'll have to trouble you with the rest," Sillin said. Flanders waved a hand dismissively. It's fine. There's no need to be so polite." The fact that Flanders dared to use the term, fourth young master, meant that he had set up a security system in the room. No one outside could know what was going on inside. In fact, Sillin wasn't worried that news would leak out even if Flanders hadn't set up a security system. Both Hui Mao and Cheto were here, so it was a piece of cake for them to control the flow of information. Flanders told Sillin about his plan. According to Flanders, he wasn't going to leave this place immediately after he was discharged from the hospital. He was going to look for someone, but he couldn't do it in a big way. He would only bring 2 or 3 bodyguards with him, bodyguards that he trusted absolutely. It would be even better if Sillin and the trio could help. If he still couldn't find that person in the next 2 days, or if he couldn't touch that person, Flanders would follow his original plan and leave instead of staying here forever. Shi Huajing had told Sillin a few things before, and if he could, he would help Shi Huajing. Sillin was a very important person to both Shi Huajing and Flanders. An hour later, another 3 people entered the recovery room. They didn't look like much, but Sillin knew that they were all experts. The trio was surprised to see Sillin's group, but they quickly regained their composure and went to report to Flanders. An hour later, 3 more people entered the recovery room. They didn't look like much, but Sillin knew that they were all experts. After completing a series of procedures, one of them pushed Flanders out of the sanatorium in a wheelchair and into a spacious flying car. The trio followed after him. "How are things over there?" Flanders asked the person who pushed him into the car. "We've been keeping an eye on them. No one is disturbing them. The old mister is busy," the person replied. "That's good." Flanders let out a sigh before saying to Sillin, "Old Mr. Sun is my mentor and 4th young master's teacher." The person Flanders was looking for was called Jiu Sun. He was Flanders' former mentor at an advanced education school. However, the old man had been kicked out of the school and lost his qualification to become an academician of the League of Stars. At the time, Jiu Sun was one of the most popular candidates. However, he was framed and stripped of many of his academic rights. After that, Jiu Sun disappeared from the public eye. Flanders had already left the school by then, and it was too late by the time he heard the news. However, after Jiu Sun left the school, he accidentally ran into Shi Huajing who had left home. Jiu Sun was the one who taught Shi Huajing everything he knew. Sillin didn't need to investigate this old mister he had been looking for a long time. Shi Huajing's medicinal knowledge was very strong, and there were many times when he was able to solve problems very well and efficiently even though he didn't take the usual route. It was no wonder that Shi Huajing, the fourth young master of the Shi family, would notice a small boss of a small medical company like Flanders. So they were brothers. It was only when fourth young master came to me and told me about teacher that I found a new junior brother. Flanders smiled. That was the first time I heard from teacher after he left the school. After that, I agreed to work with fourth young master and we secretly sent people to search for teacher. It wasn't easy for us to find out where teacher was staying, and it just so happened that I was injured as well, so I came here to receive treatment. It made sense. After all, Flanders was the boss of a medical company. He had to have a full set of treatment facilities, so there was no need for him to come here for Jo Sun. The reason Flanders told Sillin all of this was because he wanted to shorten the distance between them a little. Teacher is a stubborn person. He doesn't like to curry favor with others, and he's not good at socializing with people either. That's why he's always offended people, especially back in school. Otherwise, with his knowledge, he would have been named an academician of the League of Stars a long time ago. The flying car kept flying towards the suburbs. Large sanatoriums were nowhere to be seen, replaced by small hospitals, pharmacies, and recovery centers. In the past, there would have been fewer people here compared to the central district. But now that the prices of large sanatoriums were high, business here had improved a lot. Some of the older shops were even lined up outside. The flying car didn't stop and continued to fly towards more remote areas. Like most planets, there was a divide between the rich and the poor on this planet. However, the slums here were slightly better than the ones Sillin had seen before. In this slum area, the landmark building was a huge garbage disposal plant. Most of the waste treatment plants on this planet were located in the slums, far away from the central district. Every day, a large amount of waste would be transported here from other places. Some were from the central district, while others were from the small sanatoriums and pharmacies along the way. Around the waste treatment plant, many residents of this area were waiting there, armed to the teeth. They carried large bags and wore several layers of isolation gloves on their hands. Some were metal, some were non-metal, and there were also all kinds of tools. There were adults with children, and there were also many elderly people. They looked at the transport vehicle that was slowly approaching from a distance. It was as if they were preparing for a battle, and their fighting spirit was high. Because of the nature of the planet, there were more medical things, such as sanatoriums, various hospitals, pharmacies, and so on. The domestic waste would definitely be related to various medicines. Among this waste, there were used and unused medicines, used and discarded treatment products, broken medical equipment, and so on. Among the medicinal waste, there were some drugs with strong oxidation, strong corrosion, high volatility, easy to decompose when exposed to light, temperature sensitivity, and so on. Their contents would have special requirements. Many of the boxes and bottles that contained the drugs were made of precious materials. The residents who stayed around the waste treatment plant all day mainly sorted out such materials. If these materials entered the treatment plant, they would definitely not get a share of the results of the recycling. They would not get any benefits at all. So every time the waste was transported and had not been sent to the treatment chamber in the treatment plant, the residents around the waste treatment plant would seize the time to pick up these things. The residents here did not need to buy medicine. They would pick up all kinds of medicine from the garbage dump. Although many of the medicine had different names, the ingredients of the medicine were similar. The experienced residents would classify the medicine together and store it bit by bit in case they needed it in the future. The children living here understood some pharmacological knowledge from a very young age. Even if they didn't know the principles, didn't know the name of the substance that the medicine worked on, and didn't know the molecular formula of these drugs, they knew what these drugs were used for, what to eat when they had a cold, what to use for trauma, and what the lethal dose of lethal drugs was, and so on. Survival was the best teacher. If they didn't even know these things, they could die because of an accident at any time because there were bottles and packaging shells of all kinds of drugs everywhere. The various bottles that contained the drugs were the toys of these children since they were young. Just like when Tang Qiuqiu was in her hometown, it was common for children there to use guns as if they were eating, and it was similar here. The garbage was unloaded from the truck, and the residents rushed forward, regardless of waiting for all the garbage to be emptied. The heavily armed young adults rushed in front, and the women and children picked up at the edge. After all the garbage was unloaded, they rushed over to pick up the valuable ones in this batch. Even if they wore all kinds of gloves, some of the drugs, just a little bit of it would corrode a large piece of the wound, and there were all kinds of harmful gases around the garbage dump. It was impossible to completely block it with the poor quality masks that the residents wore. The damage to them was not small. Because of grabbing the garbage, the residents who were scratched by the machinery and corroded by the drugs didn't have time to deal with the wounds. For them, this was not strange at all. Everyone had all kinds of scars on their body. They didn't have the money to repair them, and there was no need to do it because it would always come back after it was done. There were a lot of flies on the garbage dump, big and small. After the flying car stopped, Hui Mao rushed over there to play with the flies. The residents here were only interested in the drugs and bottles. They didn't care much about a cat, even if it was a fat cat. Flanders walked out of the car after the flying car stopped. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He was almost fully recovered after the treatment. Looking at the fat cat rushing over to the garbage dump, Flanders thought about what fourth young master had said and decided not to bother with it. Waving his hand, Flanders pushed away the mask one of the bodyguards handed him. This wasn't a garbage disposal plant, and the air wasn't too bad because of the direction of the wind. Although there was a clear smell of drugs in the air, Flanders could still tolerate it. He just couldn't help coughing sometimes. Besides, the more pitiful he pretended to be, the better it was for him to go to his mentor. If he came to show off his superiority and made himself look different from the residents here, the chances of him persuading him would be very low. Leaving one of the bodyguards to keep an eye on the flying car, Flanders led the other two bodyguards and Silen's group towards the narrow street. After passing through a small alley, they saw a small courtyard at the end of it. The layout was very similar to Lycrabe's residence Silen had seen before. It was obvious that Lycrabe had been greatly influenced by this man back then. Even before entering the courtyard, they could already smell the natural scent of medicinal herbs. The courtyard door was open. When Silen and the others arrived, they happened to see someone coming out of the courtyard. It was someone who had just finished receiving treatment. From the courtyard, they could see an old man sitting in the living room. The old man was massaging a patient who was sprawled on the floor. Since there weren't any machines to treat him, he had to use his own hands most of the time. The old man had a pair of beautiful hands. Unlike the stained, wrinkled, and rough hands of most old people, Jiu Sun's hands were as smooth and resilient as those of a young man in his 20s. Most doctors would act like idiots without the aid of machines, but Jiu Sun wasn't one of them. His hands were excellent healing machines in their own right. Although they weren't as effective as the machines in sanatoriums, it was still a rare sight to see without the aid of machines. Standing next to the old man was a very muscular young man who looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. Right now, the young man was staring unblinkingly at the old man's movements. Although Flanders was very excited to see Jiu Sun, he knew that Jiu Sun hated to be disturbed when he was working. Therefore, he just stood there without making a sound. Only his breathing and heartbeat gave away his restless mood. 10 minutes later, Jiu Sun stood up and washed his hands in the basin that the burly young man handed him. After that, he put on his gloves and spoke to the patient before handing him a medicine bottle. The medicine bottle was filled with a brown liquid that had already been prepared. The patient only needed to follow the doctor's instructions and use it. After he was done with the patient, Jiu Sun finally looked at the people in the courtyard. Jiu Sun's gaze swept across the people in the courtyard and finally landed on Flanders. He frowned for a moment, then his eyes flashed for a moment before he finally calmed down. Flanders? Joe Sun said slowly. Although he was trying his best to hide it, Sillin and the others could still tell that Flanders wasn't as calm as he seemed on the surface. Teacher, cough cough cough, teacher, I've finally found you. Cough cough cough. Joe Sun took a few steps forward and helped Flanders up from his knees. Why didn't you wear a respirator when your lungs were injured? The air here will worsen a patient like you. Although you're almost fully recovered, it's best if you don't come into contact with this kind of air before you're fully recovered. Tears welled up in Flanders' eyes. He coughed a few times and said, I came as soon as I got your message. I didn't think about wearing that thing. Sillin. The two bodyguards didn't react in the slightest to their master's blatant lie. It looked like this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Flanders wasn't as composed as Sillin had been when they first met him. Instead, he was acting pitiful in front of Joe Sun like a child. After all, he had several years of experience working with Joe Sun as a teacher, so he knew a thing or two about Joe Sun's temperament. While scolding Flanders for not taking care of himself, Joe Sun had the burly man bring him a bottle of medicine. He sprayed it on Flanders and dragged him into the house. That's all for today. Close the door, Joe Sun said to the burly man. Joe Sun dragged Flanders into the house. One of Flanders's bodyguards and Shusag stayed in the courtyard to prevent any suspicious people or troublemakers from approaching. Teacher, fourth young master, no, Shihua Jing, no, Lycrabe, Joe Sun felt like slapping Flanders's head twice. What the hell is it? It's been so many years and you still haven't gotten rid of your bad habit of not being able to speak properly when you're agitated? Flanders thought to himself, I'm acting like this right in front of you. Flanders had been deeply influenced by what he went through when he was still a student. Joe Sun always had high expectations for his students. He wouldn't be as lenient as other mentors because of their connections or backgrounds. Therefore, every exam, clinical trial, and paper he wrote were the real deal. Every exam, every clinical trial, and every paper he wrote was the real deal. The students who managed to survive Joe Sun's tutelage were now doing well in the medical world. However, not every one of them was like Flanders, who still had a deep relationship with Joe Sun. Ever since they graduated, they never wanted to see Joe Sun again. The old man was too hard to please. He had a bad temper, high standards, and loved to scold people. Not many people could stand his temper. However, it was exactly because of Flanders's deep relationship with Joe Sun that it had become a conditioned reflex. Flanders would get agitated every time he was in front of Joe Sun and couldn't speak properly. He had lost count of how many times Joe Sun had scolded him because of this. Just like now. It had been years since they last met, but he was scolded as soon as they met. Joe Sun knew that the poor kid named Lycrabe he met years ago was actually Shihua Jing, the son of a powerful political family in the League of Stars. He was also known as the fourth young master of the Shi family. After a moment of silence, Joe Sun didn't respond to Flanders's request to take him away. According to Flanders's understanding of the old man, Joe Sun was going to turn him down. Joe Sun was a strict person when it came to his students, and in turn, he had high expectations of his students. As a matter of fact, Joe Sun's expectations of Riculab were much higher than Flanders. It was just that Riculab had run away from home in a sorry state. Joe Sun remembered him as a depressed and self-deprecating child, not as the fourth young master of the Shi family who was now in his prime and wielding great power. To put it bluntly, Joe Sun hated the rich and powerful. Back then, he lost his qualification to become an academician and was kicked out of the institution he worked for years because of those rich and powerful people. It would be a lie to say that he didn't mind it at all. Joe Sun might not have mentioned it, but it didn't mean that he had forgotten about it. On the contrary, he remembered it very well. He knew very well why he was set up, but that was just how his personality was. He couldn't change it even if he wanted to. Flanders panicked. He knew that he wouldn't be able to say anything to change Joe Sun's mind. In fact, he might even make the situation worse. Flanders looked at Sillin. If Shi Huajing said that Silen might be able to help, then he should be able to do something, right? Chapter 351. Noticing Flanders's gaze, Silen let out a soft cough. It was almost as if he was trying to change the topic because of how awkward the atmosphere was. Elder Sun, the layout of this place looks very familiar. I've seen Lycrabe's place before, and it's very similar to this one. Silen had used the name Riculab instead of Shi Huajing because the name was more effective and would allow Jo Sun to release his memories from the past. It was better to appeal to the old man's emotions rather than provoke him. Jo Sun's expression softened a little when he heard Silen's words, but he still didn't say anything. Silen didn't mind Jo Sun's silence either. He continued, but Elder Sun's place is much cleaner than Lycrabe's. Silen was paying close attention to Jo Sun and Flanders's expressions when he said the word messy. Both of their faces visibly twitched when he said the word messy. From the moment he walked into the courtyard, apart from the decorations and layout, the deepest impression he had was how orderly and clean everything was. For someone as strict as Jo Sun, he would definitely pay attention to some details in his life. He might not be a clean freak, but at the very least, he wouldn't allow his place to be messy. That was why Silen's comment about Lycrabe's place being messy triggered Jo Sun's urge to scold his student even if the person who used to be messy wasn't here. Flanders immediately knew that Silen was trying to persuade him. He stole a glance at Joshuan's expression before replying, Riculab lives in a very sloppy place. Flanders even emphasized the last two words of the sentence. Yeah, it's really messy. The first time I saw Lycrabe, he had a hangover and was wearing a nightgown that hadn't been washed for days. He smelled really bad, his hair was messy, and his face was covered in stubble. He looked like a dispirited uncle. Back then, Lycrabe was like a fruit that had fallen to the ground and slowly rotted away in the darkness. What Silen needed to do right now was to polish up Riculab's decadence a little and tell him everything about his drunkenness, his sloppiness, his nightclub habits, his possible indiscretions and so on. Although Silen used the word possible in a lot of places, Jo Sun's ears automatically filtered it out. The more Silen said, the more Jo Sun's expression twisted. The veins on his forehead bulged. Flanders couldn't help but shiver in fear. From what he knew of Jo Sun knew that a storm was brewing in his heart right now. Little junior brother, I'm not the one who tricked you, it's Celine. When you get scolded by teacher, don't look for me. It's Celine who said all these. Bang! Jo Sun slammed his palm on the table and cut off Silen's words. You're pissing me off. Jo Sun was panting with anger. He had taught many students in the past, and he didn't really care about them after they graduated. But the one he cared about the most was Lycrabe, the boy he met when he left the academy with a bad reputation. Although Jo Sun didn't take Lycrabe with him back then, Lycrabe had always been in Jo Sun's mind. The reason he didn't take Lycrabe with him back then was because he didn't want to drag his disciple down. After all, his reputation was already ruined, and if he dragged Lycrabe into it, Lycrabe's future would probably be ruined as well. There was no doubt that Lycrabe was an outstanding person. Otherwise, Jo Sun wouldn't have placed so much hope in Lycrabe. Back then, Jo Sun didn't tell him the reason, and he didn't know that the pitiful child was the young master of a big family in the League of Stars. But with Silen's words, Jo Sun tossed all his worries aside. The thought of his disciple turning out like this made Jo Sun so angry that he wanted to drag Lycrabe over and give him a scolding. How the hell did he grow up to be like this? But Lycrabe wasn't here. No one cares about him. Jo Sun huffed and puffed. Silen shrugged. There's nothing we can do about it. Back then, he left home, and no one cared about him. He lived alone for several years. But now, he's back with the Shi family. As the young master of the Shi family, who dares to care about him? In the end, it's all up to him. Sai, why didn't you take him with you back then? If you had, he wouldn't have lived such a ridiculous life. I don't think he can change now. Jio Sun had been wondering if he had done the right thing back then. After all, the Lycrabe he knew back then really was a lonely and helpless child. But, the more he thought about it, the more guilty he felt. The stone that had been stuck in his heart grew bigger and bigger. Flanders hurriedly said, "Little junior brother has been looking into you ever since he returned home. It's obvious that he remembers you. He reminded me a few times when I came over." Flanders seized on Jio Sun's guilt towards Lycrabe and said a lot. Jio Sun's insistence slowly turned into hesitation. It would be a lie to say that Jio Sun didn't miss his little disciple. That pitiful but talented child from back then had grown to such an extent that he didn't even know what he had grown up to now. Sigh, it's true that he had a bad reputation in the academic world, but it's been so many years, and the League of Stars isn't doing so well right now. It shouldn't be a problem for him to pay a visit, right? Elder Sun, Lycrabe really misses you. He's worried that his identity will be a burden to you, so he specifically asked senior brother Flanders to come over. Otherwise, he would have come to see you even if the Sure family were to scold him, Sillin said. That's right, teacher. Why don't you go see Lycrabe and tell us about your research results and experience? I still have a lot of questions I want to ask you, and I'm sure Lycrabe has a lot to tell you as well. If you want to come back, I'll send you back. Flanders continued to talk. His words might be full of loopholes to someone who was very experienced in dealing with people, but to Jio Sun, it was like a sharp knife stabbing into his already wavering heart. Since Jio Sun had accepted his disciple, he hoped that he could teach him everything he knew. Since Flanders and Lycrabe wanted to, Jio Sun didn't want to turn them down. I'll teach them some more, just like how I taught them back in the academy. Jio Sun sat down again and looked at the medicine bottles on the counter beside him. He couldn't help but recall how he taught that pitiful child back then. The conditions back then were even worse than they were now, and he hadn't taught much to Lycrabe. Although he had taught a lot of theory and knowledge, he hadn't been able to put it into practice, and he hadn't been able to explain many of the problems clearly. He wondered if Lycrabe had misunderstood his teachings, but he had to correct his mistakes as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would become a habit that would be very difficult to correct. As expected, he missed his disciple after all. When a person reached his age, it was only natural that they held deep feelings for each other. In the end, Jio Sun agreed to go see Lycrabe with Flanders and return after seeing Lycrabe. But would Lycrabe let him go? Of course not. At least, that was what Sillin thought. The fourth young master of the Sure family had done so well in the family, so how could he be lacking in tricks? At most, he would suffer a scolding from Jio Sun. The fourth young master of the Sure family was currently in need of manpower, and he trusted Jio Sun. Jio Sun's ability would help Sure Huajing gain more support in the Sure family and give him more authority. Flanders was overjoyed that Jio Sun agreed to go with him. His mission was to bring Jio Sun to the fourth young master's place and leave the rest to him. Oh, right. Cole, come here. Jio Sun patted the shoulder of the burly young man who had just arrived and said to Flanders, "This is the new disciple I took in after I came here. His name is Cole." The strong guy named Cole was born and raised in the slums of this planet, but he was not from this area. He used to live in another area of the slums, but there was an explosion at a waste treatment plant there, and many people in that area died in the accident. Cole was one of the lucky few who survived the explosion. However, he was seriously injured at the time and would have died if Jio Sun hadn't done his best to save him. That was why Cole had always been grateful to Jio Sun. His family had all died in that accident, and he treated Jio Sun as his only family. He was always scolded by the bad-tempered Jio Sun because his brain wasn't good. But even when he was scolded, Cole didn't show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction or resistance. In his opinion, it was a blessing to be scolded by someone. Flanders glanced at Cole. In fact, he had investigated Cole a long time ago. Cole didn't have much talent and his genotype rank wasn't high, but he had a good temper. He was one of the few people who could tolerate Jio Sun's temper. In other words, sure. Lycrabe won't be the youngest anymore. The youngest junior brother will be Cole. Flanders looked at Cole with a friendly smile. Cole scratched his head in embarrassment. Having a senior brother who was old enough to be his father wasn't bad at all. Jio-sun didn't bring too many things with him when he decided to leave this place and visit his youngest disciple. He would only come back after visiting his disciple, so he didn't pack much. Flanders quickly took care of everything here, and the group returned to the flying car's landing point. By the time they boarded the car, Hui Mao had returned and was still chewing on something. "What are you eating, Wheeze?" Shu Sag asked. Jio-sun and Cole, who had just sat down, also looked over when they heard the noise. They were indeed curious about this fat cat. After all, they had lived in this area for many years, and they had never seen such a fat and agile cat. Hui Mao stuck out its barbed tongue and stared at a few flies that had been bitten out of shape. Jio-sun and Cole's expressions immediately changed. They knew that most of the flies in this area lived in the garbage treatment plant, and they especially liked the chemicals in the garbage. That was why they were so resistant to drugs. Although they didn't look much different from normal flies on the outside, there was a huge difference in their insides. Not only that, they also possessed a certain degree of medicinal properties, or rather, toxicity. Make it spit them out already. These flies are very poisonous. Cole said anxiously. It's fine. It has a good stomach, Sillin replied. Cole went on to give a few more examples of how dangerous the flies were, but Sillin just smiled and said the same thing in response. What are you talking about? Its master doesn't even mind, so why are you in such a hurry? Sit down. Jio-sun glared at Cole, who was about to pry open the cat's mouth. His temper was rising again. Hearing Jio-sun's words, Cole shrunk back into his seat. He couldn't ignore his master's words. Squatting on Sillin's shoulder, Hui Mao chewed and swallowed the food in its mouth. Then, it let out a yawn and started taking a nap. The flying car flew straight to the planet's port. Flanders' personal spaceplane and other Flanders people were waiting for them there. The spaceplane was huge, but it wasn't eye-catching at all. There were a few larger spaceplanes parked around it, and they looked even more attractive than the one Flanders was using. Sillin walked into the lounge Flanders had arranged for them. After closing the door, Sillin asked Cheto, "How's the information gathering going?" 81%. The rest is a bit more troublesome, but I'm sure we'll be able to gather everything if we stay here for another day, Cheto answered. It's fine. 81% is more than enough. Cheto looked like he was following Sillin around the whole time, but the truth was that he was copying information through the internet and all kinds of communication channels. Sillin had asked Cheto to gather information on the planet's sanatoriums, hospitals, pharmacies, medicines, treatment methods, and so on. Cheto would send the information to a U on the 11th Squad starship, and a U, Sigma, and Yudi would discuss the information further and analyze the feasibility of building a sanatorium on the starship. Sillin thought that the 11th Squad starship should build a treatment area that was similar to a sanatorium. This way, the patients wouldn't have to go to a special place for treatment, and it would be best if they could do it on their own starship. Of course, it was just an idea. There were a lot of places that weren't as easy as they seemed. Otherwise, anyone could build their own private sanatorium instead of going to Sector E. Right now, Sillin was busy, so he left the matter of building a sanatorium to a U and the others. Sillin moved his attention to Hui Mao. How's it going on your side? Hui Mao stretched lazily before replying, how's it going? Hui Mao sent the information to Sillin's microcomputer. The reason it went to the garbage dump wasn't just to play. It was to help Sillin collect some things he needed. Just like Cole said, the flies were resistant to a lot of drugs because of their frequent exposure to them. Their genes were also mutated by the drugs, and they were immune to a lot of drugs. Every fly had a different level of drug resistance and the type of drug they were exposed to. That was why Hui Mao had swatted a lot of flies. To the residents of the garbage dump, the cat was just playing a game. No one would have thought that the cat would collect the fly's genetic information. Sillin analyzed the genetic information Huimao had collected further and filtered out the mutated genes that were responsible for the resistance. Flanders was a businessman in the pharmaceutical industry, so his spaceplane was equipped with some relevant equipment. Flanders asked Flanders to borrow the equipment from Sillin, but the latter didn't ask about it. Shi Huajing had told him not to look into Sillin's affairs. Sillin smiled as he stared at the data and analysis diagram on the equipment. He didn't think that he would discover these things at Sector E. Well, this is the second gift he prepared for the people of Miracle. Chapter 352. Flanders flew according to the navigation route Shi Huajing had given him. This was Sector A, the center of political power in the League of Stars, and the unstable environment the League of Stars was in right now. Every political organization in Sector A had protected themselves tightly, and their already strong defense had grown several times stronger than before. Shi Huajing had sent someone to pick them up. If they hadn't, they would have had a hard time entering Sector A. The patrolling fleets, the scanning signals, and the constant requests for ID confirmation were enough to annoy them to death. A moment of carelessness and they would be labeled as terrorists. It was a principle that one would rather kill 1,000 innocent people than let a single one go. Flanders and the others had boarded the starship that came to pick them up before they officially entered Sector A. There were a lot of places in Sector A that his spaceplane couldn't go to. He could at least take a look around before the League of Stars fell into chaos, but he definitely couldn't now. Their main focus was on Josun. Sillin and the other two were Flanders' bodyguards, so they weren't too eye-catching compared to Josun. After they boarded the starship Shi Huajing sent, someone contacted Sillin and relayed Shi Huajing's message to him. The fourth young master said that everything on his side is almost done. Please don't worry, the person said. Shi Huajing meant that he already had a way to get Sillin into Sector C, and that Sillin didn't need to do too many things. However, it also meant that Shi Huajing must have made a move against the military already. It was true that Shi Huajing wouldn't have become the Shi family's revered, fourth young master, in just 2 or 3 years if he didn't have some tricks up his sleeve. Right now, Sillin couldn't communicate with Shi Huajing just yet. It wasn't safe, and the signal wasn't good. The area they were in right now was filled with strong electromagnetic interference due to the stellar activity. Therefore, Shi Huajing wanted Sillin to learn about the situation first and prepare for the upcoming arrangements. Aside from relaying Shi Huajing's message, the person also passed Sillin a video message about a certain person. It was Sword, a lieutenant colonel of the 5th Legion of the 8 Great Legions. There were a lot of colonels in the military, but the person on the screen was no ordinary person. It was because he had experienced the prisons of Sector S before. Back then, he was sent to Sector S's prison because he wantonly slaughtered innocent civilians and even his comrades. Normally, if the League of Stars' army killed some civilians, it wouldn't cause too much of a reaction. The higher-ups wouldn't even bother to pay attention to it. However, if they killed a certain number of people in one go, many times, and brazenly, it would be a different story. Sword was such a person. He was arrogant, conceited, cold-blooded, ruthless, bloodthirsty, and there were all sorts of comments on him. He had massacred many times. The last time, he had slaughtered tens of thousands of people, all of whom were civilians. Moreover, he had killed to his heart's content despite the interference of the local government. After that, Swood was imprisoned in Sector S's prison. However, the League of Stars fell into chaos a few years later, and the military split into 8 corps. When Sector S's prison was abolished, a lot of people were taken back from there. Now the 5th Corps had taken Swood, a former killing machine, into their ranks, and he played a lot of role in the subsequent corps battles. However, this killing machine was now dead. Sillin didn't know how Shi Huajing killed Swood, but he did know that Swood must have something to do with the place they were going to this time. Sillin didn't think that Shi Huajing killed Swood to help him. It was probably because Swood and Shi Huajing had a grudge, and Shi Huajing killed the guy without a word. It just so happened that Silen contacted Shi Huajing about going to Sector C, and that was why Shi Huajing told him about it. Otherwise, he would have kept it a secret forever. Even if others learned of Swood's death, they wouldn't be able to link it to him. After all, Shi Huajing represented the Shi family, and it wasn't wise to clash directly with the military right now. At the same time, the fact that Shi Huajing told Silen about Swood was also a sign of trust. From this, it could be seen that Shi Huajing had a lot of backup plans even without Silen's help. In fact, he might have planted a lot of spies in the military a long time ago. The images Shi Huajing showed Silen were of Swood's performance in various situations. The man was a man of few words, and his entire body exuded a chilling aura. Even though it was just a video, it was enough to make the viewer feel the man's icy aura deeply. There was no emotion in his eyes, and he didn't show much expression when he killed someone either. It was as if he had done something insignificant. So, can you do it? Silen looked at Shu Sag. Silen understood why Shi Huajing showed him this video. He wanted one of them to disguise themselves as Swood. Of the trio, Shu Sag was the most suitable candidate. After all, he was a soldier himself, and his special traits only became more obvious after he put on his uniform. Also, according to the information he had received, Shu Sag and Swood's physique were very similar. Shu Sag himself could make some minor adjustments to his body, so there was no need to worry about his appearance. The most important thing was Swood's special traits. Shu Sag put down his hand and stared at the man on the screen. "Of course," he said with a smirk. As soon as he said the word "of course," Shu Sag's aura changed abruptly. It went from casual and unruly to cold and distant. His aura was so cold and distant that it left the messenger gaping in shock. Many people could portray that kind of cruelty and arrogance, that kind of gloominess that felt like a blizzard was coming when they were motionless, but not everyone could embody that kind of special traits that belonged to the military. Like a javelin, he stood with the exact same posture. He used his gaze to replace the coldness and gloom in his words. Behind the gloom, his emotionless eyes slowly looked over. Behind Shu Sag, Swoder was also looking over from the holographic screen. The same movements, the same eyes, the same aura. It made people forget that Shu Sag wasn't wearing the army's uniform at all, and he didn't look the same as Swood. The messenger's eyelids twitched when he saw those eyes, and a chill ran down his spine. For a moment, it was as if he saw Swood standing in front of him again. The man who came from the military but killed to his heart's content like an assassin, ignoring the rules and discipline and not hesitating to kill his teammates. In that instant, the man reflexively reached for his gun, but he immediately remembered that this was just a substitute. The real Swood was already dead. After all, he had participated in the assassination of Swood not long ago, so he had a deep impression of Swood. It was precisely because of this deep impression that when he found out about Shi Huajing's plan, he wondered if he could find such a replacement. He didn't expect that there would really be such a person who could display Swood's characteristics. Although he wasn't sure how similar they were, at least at that moment, he felt that Swood was standing in front of him again. Swood, who had been through prison, was even more gloomy. Shu Sag's own experience wasn't simple either, and he seemed to have some kind of talent. The effect made Silen very satisfied. To cover up the awkwardness of reflexively pulling out his gun, the messenger coughed and continued to explain the situation to Silen. Shu Sag, on the other hand, turned back into that unreliable middle-aged man. He casually lay on a chair, picked up an apple and started munching on it, as if the cold and gloomy aura just now wasn't created by him. After passing through the interference zone, Silen was finally able to contact Shi Huajing. "How is it?" Shi Huajing asked. What he wanted to know the most was how well Silen and the others could impersonate Swood. The better the impersonation, the easier the operation would be, and the higher the success rate. The messenger told Shi Huajing about what happened just now, and Shu Sag gave him face by putting on another performance. Shi Huajing couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder. "Where did you find such a talent this time, Silen?" Silen only smiled. It couldn't be helped. Shusag's birthplace couldn't be revealed right now. Shi Huajing didn't delve too deeply into the matter. His main goal was to discuss the next step of the plan with Silen. Before this, he was going to impersonate Silen, but now that he had a better substitute, he had to change his plan a little. It's not hard to get into Sector C. I received a message not long ago that might be able to help you get in. Shi Huajing said, a while ago, Swood's 5th Corps had a little conflict with the 1st Corps, and I took care of Swood during that time. However, it was a pity that the 1st Legion had suffered some losses this time and lost some people. As for the place you mentioned, it won't be easy to get in. The security there is very strict, and the only people allowed in are prisoners or escorts. Swood is one of the escorts. Silen said. That's right. Sword has already escorted 2 batches of people. If nothing goes wrong, the 3rd batch of prisoners of war should also be escorted by Sword. After all, not everyone can be indifferent to the kind of experiment that uses prisoners of war soldiers. Silen nodded. He had a general idea of Shi Huajing's plan. But, Shi Huajing continued, even if Shusag can disguise himself as Sword well, and I have some of Sword's identification in my hands, the base you're heading to will have a stricter identity check. They will also run nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, gene activity, antibodies and so on. You know that there are some tests that even spiritual Master Swood can't perform exactly the same tests every time. There will always be some slight differences. After all, the human body is a dynamic process. If the test results were exactly the same, it would be intercepted because it meant that someone had copied and stolen the test records of the same person. This was the biggest problem Shi Huajing was facing right now. Silen thinks for a moment before looking at Cheto. After Cheto nodded, Silen said to Shi Huajing, we can take care of this. Chapter 353. Can it be solved? Shi Huajing looked at Silen. After making sure that Silen was serious and wasn't forcing the issue, he nodded. He didn't press the issue any further and went on to discuss the next step of the plan. Shi Huajing didn't ask how Silen was going to solve the problem. Although he hadn't known Silen for a long time, he knew a little about Silen back when he was in Vanguard Division 6. Silen was quite a mysterious person. At first glance, he didn't seem like anything special. Even though he was a squad leader of one of the 4 major hunter regiments, he still wasn't enough for most people. But after spending more time with him, one would realize that he was always able to involve a lot of people and things. He was like a riddle that was hard to see through. These are the options I can arrange. What do you think? Shi Huajing told Celine his thoughts and several action plans that he had already set up. He asked Celine to make a choice, and he would immediately make arrangements after making his decision. Shusag's route was almost ready, but Silen definitely wouldn't just go with this one. He would arrange at least 2 routes. If one of them failed, the other could continue. Silen considered Shi Huajing's proposal for a moment before saying, I choose the second option. Shi Huajing raised an eyebrow when he heard Silen's choice. The second one? Out of all the options, the second one wasn't easy to control. Even though Shi Huajing thought it was a good option, he didn't dare make the decision to go with it. He didn't expect Silen to choose this option. It sounded like Silen was going to implement it himself. Shi Huajing had told Silen before that if people outside the base wanted to enter that place, they would either be prisoners or escorts. Shusag chose the escorts route, while Silen chose the prisoners route. However, it was not easy to be a prisoner of war sent to the base. When Shi Huajing told Silen about this plan, he had clearly explained that the prisoners of war were the test subjects of Miracle Corporation, and their conditions weren't good when they were locked up. They were thrown there like experimental animals. Other than that, these prisoners of war would undergo a life index test before they were escorted away. If they were on their last breaths, they would be sent on their way with a bullet. If they were still alive, they would also be sent on their way with a bullet. The only difference was that the people with relatively higher HP would be sent on their way with a bullet. It was to reduce his health points to around average. This was a preliminary test at the base. They needed people with better physiques and stronger recovery abilities. Under the same conditions of injury, when these captives were transported, they would be categorized according to their recovery, just like how they would screen and classify animals. They didn't lack test subjects anyway, so they didn't feel it was a pity for those who didn't make it. Every once in a while, someone would check on the condition of the prisoners of war. After all, they were enemies. If the people escorting them weren't satisfied, they would shoot the prisoners dead. Of course, if Shusag performed well and used Swoosha's identity as the leader of the escorts, he might be able to take care of them. Then how are you going to get an average health point? Shi Huajing asked. Self-mutilation was a skill, not to mention that there was a standard self-mutilation. I know what I'm doing, Sillin replied. All right. Since you've made up your mind, I'll take care of the rest. But once we get to the base, you'll have to rely on yourselves. I can't help much. From the moment Shi Huajing started talking, just like before, he pretended not to see the cat peeking its head out. Then, when Hui Mao saw that no one was paying attention to him, he flipped and jumped over. Between Sillin's group and the comm screen, a gray shadow kept flitting about. But both Sillin and Shi Huajing pretended not to see it and continued discussing the operation plan. In the end, Hui Mao jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and glared at Shi Huajing on the comm screen with disdain. However, Shi Huajing's cultivation was much higher than before, so he continued to ignore this gaze. He knew that if he responded, this fat cat would say something like, defeated opponent, again. Shi Huajing would not do such a thing that would make him feel uncomfortable. When the starship arrived at Shi Huajing's turf, Shi Huajing arranged for a not-so-grand welcome ceremony because Jiu Sun didn't like it. Even so, almost everyone in the Shi family knew that fourth young master's master was here, and that fourth young master had personally gone to greet him. That was why some of the Shi family members began to think of ways to make a move on Jiu Sun. Maybe they could get fourth young master's protection this way. Shi Huajing knew his master's temper very well, so he declared that no one was allowed to harass Jiu Sun without his permission. Otherwise, While Shi Huajing was greeting Jiu Sun, he ordered his men to escort Sillin and Flanders away. With Jiu Sun and Flanders as a cover, no one paid any attention to Sillin's group. Somewhere at the border of Sector C, a fleet was parked. There were a lot of wreckage and debris floating around the fleet, and there were also dead soldiers. The wreckage and lost lives looked insignificant in this vast universe. Inside a command ship, 2 fighter jets flew out from the center of the battlefield and entered it. After they were parked, 2 people disembarked from the jets. One of them was the famous killer, Swoder, and the other seemed to be one of Swoder's subordinates who had been promoted to Swoder's aide-de-camp not long ago. No one paid attention to the aide-de-camp. Of course, no one paid attention to Swoder either. That expressionless and gloomy face made everyone shiver in fear. Moreover, there were a lot of blood stains on Swoder's space combat uniform. Most likely, the killer had gone on a killing spree somewhere and returned only after he was satisfied. Lieutenant Colonel Swoder, the commander is looking for you. The other man wearing the same lieutenant colonel insignia walked up to Swoder and said a few words. He didn't say anything else after that. He had just fought a war, and he was so tired that all he wanted to do was find a place to sleep for a couple of days. Swoder didn't even nod at him. He simply walked straight to the command room. No one was surprised by his attitude by now. Shusag had seen the general layout of this command ship a long time ago, and he had memorized it. Moreover, Cheto had shown Shusag the full scan of the command ship before the fighter jets entered the command room. There were a couple of verification procedures on the way to the command room, and Shusag had passed all of them with Cheto's help. His face had been disguised, and his figure had been adjusted to look exactly like Swoder. Coupled with his special characteristics and the modifications Cheto had made to the detection equipment, no one would suspect the man who walked through the corridors of the starship so confidently. According to the rules, an aide-de-camp couldn't enter the command room without the commander's permission. Therefore, Shusag was the only one who entered the command room. An impatient man was already sitting inside the communication room. He was none other than the commander and the highest commander of this command ship. The commander's expression finally eased a little when he saw Swoder. It was obvious that the commander knew about Swoder's penchant for killing when he went crazy, so he didn't say anything when he saw that the man in front of him didn't even bother to say a word to him. He simply instructed Swoder to escort the prisoners to the base and let him leave. No one liked spending time with someone like Swoder. At the same time, a bunch of spaceplanes were transporting the half-dead prisoners of war to a transport ship next to the command ship. They were all gathered inside the transport ship's warehouse. Maybe they didn't even know what was going to happen to these prisoners of war. In the dark warehouse, there were some wounded prisoners of war lying in disorder. Some were injured during the battle between the two sides, while others were shot after the prisoners were captured. The entire warehouse was filled with the thick stench of blood. There were no windows in the warehouse, only the life support system was pumping oxygen into it. Silen's body was also covered in blood. Of course, it wasn't all his blood. He just looked a little worse for wear, and Hui Mao had tampered with his vitals, so the results showed that his injuries were more serious. So, Silen was quite conscious as he lay there. He could even catch a light from a button at the corner of the warehouse to observe the situation around him. Hui Mao had wandered around the transport ship to investigate the enemy's situation. Anyway, with his ability, it was very difficult to be discovered. He was probably investigating the enemy's warehouse at the moment. In the warehouse where the prisoners of war were locked up, there was a strong sense of oppression in the thick stench of blood. This sense of oppression was expressed through the prisoners' heartbeats and breathing. The prisoners' painful groans were filled with despair. Silen sat against the wall of the warehouse and quietly observed everything around him. Because he had been thrown here earlier, he easily grabbed the problem of leaning against the wall. The man was not far from where Silen was. He was thrown into the warehouse after Silen came in. Silen didn't pay attention to the man's appearance at the time, because the man's back was facing Silen when he was thrown in. After being thrown in, he even rolled a few times, then crawled to the edge of the warehouse while trembling. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and kept coughing, looking like he was about to die. Slowly, the coughing grew softer and quieter. The others probably thought that the guy had died because he couldn't endure it, but Silen, who was closer to him and had relatively clear senses, could tell that the guy was just asleep. Yulu. This guy was always like this. He looked like he couldn't wake up and was always sleep-deprived. Celine really didn't expect that he would be able to meet an acquaintance in this place. Moreover, he didn't expect that Yulu would be captured and even suffer such a degree of gunshot wound. Although it wasn't fatal, he had indeed walked right under the nose of the Grim Reaper. With Yulu's strength, it shouldn't be, right? The strangest thing to Silen was that the penetrating gunshot wound on Yulu's body was caused by someone shooting from behind. Chapter 354. After all, Yulu was also a gun user. Given his sensitivity toward guns, there was no way he would have been shot so easily. Moreover, Silen looked at the gunshot wounds on Yulu's body. Although he had been shot many times, none of them had hit a vital point. Silen thought of one possibility: Yulu had done it on purpose. But why would Yulu want to get himself into such a miserable state? What was the point of taking such a risk? Someone who could shoot Yulu's back at such close range had to be someone he knew, possibly a comrade of Yulu's. Silen didn't believe that Yulu's comrade would cooperate with Yulu's scheme. The gunshot wounds didn't look like they were held back at all. In other words, there might really be a spy on Yulu's side. From the looks of it, the First Army's loss this time might have been due to an internal rebellion. Silen didn't go talk to Yulu directly. Instead, he quietly observed the movements of Yu Lu and the others in the warehouse. Yu Lu was sleeping well. Although his breathing was a little weak, it was still steady. He was still alive. Some people in the warehouse were whispering. Not everyone had Silen's vision. For most of them, all they saw was darkness. They could only make out the general situation of the warehouse from the dim light of the indicator buttons in the corner. After the prisoners on the transport ship were dealt with, it quickly set off. For the prisoners locked up in the warehouse, they had to endure the discomfort of the transport ship's flight in addition to their injuries. Silen and Yu Lu stayed there quietly. There were cameras in the warehouse that showed the conditions of the prisoners one by one. When a certain number of prisoners were found dead, the people in charge of the guards would drag them out and throw them into space. The army was cruel and merciless. When the guards dragged a few dead people out of the warehouse, there was a small commotion in the warehouse. Some of the prisoners who were in an extreme state of mind wanted to go out, but in the end, they were shot at. Silen noticed that Yu Lu didn't react at all. His breathing was steady, as if he was indifferent to all this. Or maybe he was just used to it. Other than dragging the dead out of the warehouse twice, the guards didn't come in to cause any trouble for the captives. Shusag's disguise as Swode must have played a part in that. Everything went smoothly, and Silen also took advantage of this time to rest. The following operations would not be easy. The transport ship's voyage in Sector C was pretty smooth. They did not encounter any interference from the other corps, and the First Legion did not chase after them to request a prisoner exchange either. There was something fishy about this. Logically speaking, if a talent like Yu Lu had fallen into the enemy's hands, the people of the First Legion would definitely propose a prisoner exchange, but this was not the case. Currently, there was indeed a storm brewing between the various legions. Silen did not wish to get involved, so he did not speak to Yu Lu. When the transport ship finally arrived at the planet, Silen opened his eyes. A third of the people in the warehouse were gone, and the condition of the captive's physique was obvious to see. Those who had recovered well could already walk around freely. Although they still couldn't do strenuous exercise, and they looked a little haggard after being imprisoned here, they were much stronger than before. Yu Lu had also recovered very well. Although the penetrating wound from the bullet didn't look like it had healed much, and he still looked listless and lifeless, Silen had a feeling that the guy was hiding his true strength. He might be a sickly invalid one moment, but he could turn into a ferocious tiger the next. The transport ship did not enter the planet directly. Instead, it stopped at the spaceport outside. There were specialized personnel there to sort and process the captives. Silen looked up at the warehouse door, and it didn't take long for it to open. A group of fully armed people stood outside the door, but they didn't look like soldiers. The soldiers of the 5th Legion who were responsible for the detention were dressed in their army uniforms and standing at the back. These people, who were fully armed from head to toe, stood together with a few people in lab uniforms. This should be Miracle's own armed forces. Moreover, these fully armed people were taller and stronger than the average person. They were also very agile and didn't seem clumsy at all. Their movements with guns were very skilled and straightforward. Even if one couldn't see the eyes behind their helmets, one could tell that they weren't people with sympathy. The inexplicable, hair-raising aura emanating from these people made the already restless, despairing, and depressed atmosphere even more intense than before. A captive who seemed to be in a daze staggered a few steps toward the warehouse door, like a fly following its instincts and flying toward the light. However, with a sudden sound, this person's entire chest exploded, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Someone in the fully armed group had opened fire. Just like Silen's first impression of these people were cold, numb, and didn't hesitate to attack. With that person as an example, the people in the warehouse who were about to make a move also quieted down and didn't dare to act recklessly. The few people in lab uniforms glanced at the warehouse without much expression. One of them said, "The quality of the test product is about the same as the previous batches, and the quantity is also about the same." The others nodded in agreement. As they spoke, they also started to move, instructing the people to bring the captives out of the warehouse. A group of people who were completely unarmed walked into the warehouse and kicked the people who were either sitting or lying on the ground. When Silen saw these people coming over, he tactfully stood up and gathered in the middle. Although Yulu looked listless, his movements weren't slow either. A few people who didn't have time to stand up were kicked into the middle of the warehouse. The sound of bones breaking was very clear. If it wasn't because everyone had gathered in the middle and there were many of them, blocking the few people who were kicked over, they would probably have hit the wall. The wall behind them had a protruding corner, and that would definitely break a few more bones. When they were escorted out, the heavily armed men pointed their guns at the captives. This was just to make the captives leave quickly. At the same time, it also served as a warning. No one dared to make any big moves in such a situation. After passing through the docking passage and exiting the transport ship, Silen and the captives arrived at a field with a dozen or so circular cubicles. The captives were divided into more than 10 groups and passed through these cubicles. When they passed through the cubicles, their physical conditions were reflected one by one, and the people in lab uniforms categorized them according to their test results. Hui Mao had lurked around the area and altered Silen's test results so that Silen was classified as a low test subject. Yu Lu was classified as a medium test subject, and this was the result of the surveillance after he had concealed his abilities. If it was judged according to the actual situation, Yu Lu would definitely be classified as a high-level test subject. After the prisoners were categorized, they would be sent to the research base separately. That was why Silen and Yulu boarded different spaceships. At the same time, Shu Sag and Chedo, who were disguised as Swoosh and his aide, were about to continue their final escort mission. This time, they wouldn't be traveling with any of the spaceships carrying the captives. They would be taking another spaceship with them. This was the rule. 4 spaceships departed from the spaceport and landed at the planet's port. After all the captives had been escorted away, Swoosh arrived at the spaceport to complete the official handover. The escort mission was finally complete. Happy working with you, Lieutenant Colonel Swoosh. The handover personnel smiled at Swoosh, but he wasn't annoyed by the man's usual cold response. Instead, he packed up the documents in his hands and left on his own. The soldiers responsible for escorting the captives would leave later, so they couldn't be bothered with them. After the handover personnel left, Shu Sag exchanged a glance with Chedo and walked back to the spaceships. Silen and the low-test subjects were thrown into a transport vehicle and sent to a different base. However, it wasn't the one Mo Hung was imprisoned in. It didn't matter. Getting here was already half the battle. Besides, the 2 bases weren't far from each other. Since the captives were newly arrived test subjects, the researchers didn't act immediately. Instead, they nurtured them for a few days. Only when their bodily functions had recovered to a certain level would they officially begin the experiment. When Silen was passing by an empty space, he noticed some fresh bloodstains. They were dark red in color and darker than the average person's. Celine pretended to fall and touch a bit of the blood. He analyzed the blood for a bit. It was human blood, but the genetic information contained in the bloodstains indicated that the owner of the bloodstains possessed a level of genetic hellification that no ordinary person could possess. Moreover, there were signs of forced modification. It was obvious that these people had been modified and injected with genetic drugs. The so-called experiment was to develop genetic drugs. The new batch of captives were locked inside transparent cages. Silen had seen such cages before, but they were a little smaller. Each captive only had about 1 square meter of space. However, there were a lot of instruments inside the small space. They could monitor the test subjects inside the cages and record their vital signs. There was a number on the outside of each cage, which was the code of the test subject locked in the cage. After all the test subjects were locked up, the walls around the cages were no longer transparent. The people inside couldn't see what was happening outside, but the researchers outside could clearly see what was going on inside the cages. Sillin, who was locked in the cage, looked like a man who was exhausted. He leaned against the wall and looked like he was asleep. The researchers patrolling outside only glanced at him briefly before leaving. Most of the new test subjects were like this, so the researchers wouldn't pay too much attention to them. In a place where no one was paying attention, Huimao, who had eaten and slept his fill, was already making his move. Making a move here or at Mo Heng's base would attract the attention of all parties, but if he made a move at the other bases, there would definitely be a lot less people paying attention to this one. Moreover, the larger the area of influence, the better the effect. Huimao thought happily, this is just like fishing. Casting a wide net will definitely be effective. And so, with its glorious mission, Huimao set off. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.